Good evening, all. Welcome to the scrutiny panel on the 24th of January. No practice evacuations planned for this evening, so we know the drill. If the alarm sounds, evacuate the town hall down the staircase or the back staircase to the high street and into the town hall car park. The meeting is being broadcast live over the internet on the council's websites and will be available to listen to afterwards. Discreet use of mobile phones and other devices is welcomed, but they should be set to silent and not use voice or camera flash functions. We'll have a break at 7:30 and every 90 minutes thereafter to recharge the brains. I'm Councillor Dennis Willets, Councillor for Lexton Braeswick Ward, Chairman of the panel. On my right,
Councillor William Sunnox, Rural North.
Councillor Darius Laws, Rural North.
Councillor Mike Lilly, Old Heath, the Hive and Rowhedge.
Councillor Lee Scordis, Old Heath, Hive and Rowhedge.
Councillor Paul Smith, St Anson, St John's.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End Ward. Councillor Adam Fox, Deputy Leader of the Council.
Councillor David King, Leader of the Council.
Councillor Mark Corey, Portfolio Holder for Resources and Representative of Wivenhoe Ward.
Richard Block, Chief Operating Officer.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Mel Rundle, Safety and Protection Manager and Senior Support to the panel this evening.
Substitutions this evening. Councillor Lissimore sends her apologies and Councillor Sunnox is substituting for her. Item 3, urgent items, none to report. Item 4, declaration of interest. No declaration. Minutes, there are no minutes to approve at this meeting. General, have your say. There are no visitors with us. Decisions. Item 7, decisions taken under special urgency provision, no such decisions. Cabinet on portfolio holder decisions called in for review on item 8, there are none. Item 9, A and B, items requested by the panel or other members of the council to be considered in our future programme. Have any written requests been made?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any requests to be made on the day? No, there are none. That takes us on to item 10, the briefing by the portfolio holder for resources with a particular focus on the budget. Can I welcome Councillor Corey, an old hand at this, knows the form well. The scheme of delegation, which you may have, lists 13 points, which are the main features of the portfolio holder for resources. Can I ask Councillor Corey to present to us his view of the world from his portfolio, in particular, what issues and activities and solutions he has personally brought to the portfolio of resources during his 10 months or so in office so far this year. I know he could go back years and years when he was doing marvellous things on resources before becoming leader, but we're just concentrating on what has happened in the last 10 months, if that's okay, and of course a prelude to what will be in the budget, if you so wish.
Thank you, Councillor Willets. 5 minutes or 5 hours, I can do both, but I will be short because I think it's better for you to ask questions and then it actually gives us more time later to talk about the budget. I'll try not to stray too much on the budget because you might want to deal with those two items, deal with me separately to the budget when you have 3 of us ready to answer questions on that as well. So it's been a pleasure to take on this portfolio again, which I have previously worked within. And officers may change, but there's still a very strong team and a strong level of trust in the officers that we work with. But also this portfolio ensures a view across the whole council of services and their efficient running and how we staff those. I'll start with some of the positives because I'm always honest. There are negatives as well to look at, and some of those will be in the budget that we discuss. But some of the positives have been the continuing use of our assets, okay, and the asset management strategy that we've sort of got in order at this point, and we can look at and see making money for this council because we sweat the assets. In some cases, we are disposing of assets and selling those. So in the case of Gosbecks, I was just talking to Richard Block about that, how we need to move out of that because we've sold it, and we're moving into Rowan House very soon, at the end of February into March, and I'll come back to Rowan House. But the more sort of exciting stuff up at Northern Gateway has really rolled on, and we have completed a deal there up at Northern Gateway, which includes a wide-ranging health campus. We are in discussions with others to settle up there as a new home for local organisations and new business. So there are still, despite these sort of inflationary pressures and ups and downs of the economy, mainly downs at the moment, we are seeing green shoots in Colchester continuing to come through. So I'm positive about our commercial asset management strategy and how we sweat our assets, sell and buy pieces of land for future investment. Linked to that, as I said, Rowan House has been a development of our own where we've taken the opportunity to take some government money and our own investment to finally update and refurbish our main headquarters for staff, and to do it with an absolutely environmental aspect to make the building as low carbon as possible. And that has been done effectively, and also to make it as efficient as possible in a sense of not just environmentally, but economically. So we have rented more of the space out, with a whole floor going to Essex County Council. That's no longer confidential. That decision has gone through the call-in period now, and also renting out part of the second floor as well. So we have a much smaller footprint, so we're working more efficiently, and we have been, and I thank staff for working so dynamically outside of the main hub of Rowan House for the last year or so. Of course, COVID had a triggering effect in greater working from home, but we've always been very flexible with our staff. Related to that as well with our staff, we've avoided strikes, and I must say that for public sector organisations at the moment, that's a good thing. I think we have managed to agree a pay deal with the main union, Unison, to ensure our staff are paid a fair wage. We had negotiated a local settlement, but due to the rapid changes in the economy over the last 9 months and inflation and the cost of living crisis deepening, then we felt it was only fair to discuss pay offers. We did put an offer back to them, and we've ended up accepting one that's quite a nationally recognised increase, despite the original local pay deal. What I wanted to celebrate in a sense as one of the last positives is the recent news, and I'm sure my colleagues to the left will talk about this as well as the budget, is the Luff bid that we've just achieved. So another investment into Colchester, and that's been a good example of partnership working with the county council, with all parties being involved. And that is where Colchester remains strong and resilient, because of its partnership working with other organisations, not overlapping with other public sector organisations, working together, seeing where we can make efficiencies, seeing where we can make new connections, and overall, hopefully reducing the sort of burdens upon our public and helping them live healthier and happier lives in Colchester. So we'll see how that goes with that funding bid and rolling out the business plans within it. I come then to the harder decisions, the resilience aspect. We're having to become more and more resilient as council finances up and down the country are squeezed. But despite everything, we remain responsible. And that is why this budget has tough decisions within it. I'm Paul Cook is listening in, he's our Section 151 officer. He had to be assured that we were making the decisions going forward that would keep this council resilient. So those responsible decisions are in the budget before you in the later paper. They are tough decisions to be made, but we believe in good public services, and they have to be maintained by ensuring we have a future medium-term financial forecast that is sustainable. So I will just dwell upon the budget that we have had to assure the Section 151 officer that we are looking at reducing cost, reducing revenue cost, increasing income, and ensuring we are not over reliant, on our savings, and we're not sort of taking capital money and putting it into revenue. So we've talked about our restraint on using new homes bonus. We've continued that up, that process, that practice. So I won't go into the budget any more than that, but what I would say is we have been as responsible as we can to ensure that our finances are stable for the medium-term financial forecast, that our Section 151 officer is agreeing this budget to be sound going forward. And that includes, as I say, the next 2 or 3 years, not just this year's coming budget. I'd just finish by saying, I know it's the leader's ethos, and it's definitely mine, to be as open as possible. And I know there's been discussions with some members on this panel and with the governance and audit members as well, that we want to continue to be as open as possible on this budget. And also, I know there'll be some questions I feel later about the Treasury management. And it's about understanding we can take on board comments, we will adapt. That's the best way to get through this. And I welcome further comments, and I welcome your questions about how to further see efficiencies, further increase income, and make set this council on a continued even keel into the future. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that brief resume of your portfolio. If I can start off the questioning, you mentioned the Northern Gateway financing, and I note from your scheme of delegation that you have the general fund land, including acquisitions, disposals, commercial lettings in your bailiwick. There seems to be a degree of what I would call messy leasing in which the council is involved. For instance, if we look upon on land registry for Rowan House, it seems to be sort of owned by us, leased to another party, then subleased back to us. And that seems to be a feature of several deals in which the council is involved. I won't go into the Northern Gateway, but do you see any prospect of unscrambling these recursive leases where we're leasing to someone and someone else is then leasing back to us? It may be that there is a good financial sound investment reason for doing it, but is this a matter that you have under review? And what is your personal view of these recursive leases?
Thank you, Councillor Willits. So my answer is yes and no. In some cases, there are examples where it is messier than we would like it to be. That's why we ensured we had an asset management strategy that will continue to be reviewed and evolve and continue to evolve. So in autumn, we want to see a sort of finish to that. So hopefully by then we'll come back and show where those knots have been untied. The example of Rowan House is an interesting one, bearing in mind you have Councillor Smith on the table, who negotiated that actually very good deal, and I'm welcome for you to come in. It was an example where we could gain the asset, but also gain sort of some revenue income at the same time. So actually it was beneficial to do it that way. Now, I think there's other examples. The reasons I say, yes, I would want to continue reviewing a number of examples where it's messy, whereas that particular example is actually a messy example that's advantageous to us. So it was done in that way. in that instance, and more than happy to hear Councillor Smith's version of it. But you're right, there are other examples where it's less clean. So our strategy going forward is always to offer a longer lease, not to sell, but those longer leases are much cleaner over a whole site. So we're sort of the Northern Gateway commercial site south. The way we entered that was to reduce some of the risk with an asset strip, but we will get that clean ownership back at the end. There's a very clear management of that, so it won't end up with any complications by the end of the sort of whole period of our financing agreement with the investment fund. So my answer to you very clearly is yes, we do need to continue to review. There are knots and bits and pieces where leases are unclear, but there are examples where actually they may cross over, in the example of Rowan House, and there are examples going forward where we're making them much cleaner than they had been in the past.
Certainly good news. My second question is on item 11 of your portfolio, the management of the repairs and maintenance and planned maintenance of buildings and disability access to council buildings. This seems to have been a particular contentious point over the year, almost culminating in members resigning. And I think we're now back to the position where some would argue that it is difficult to access the town hall. Could you give your take on it, and what have you done to ensure that disability access to the town hall and other council buildings has improved over the course of the year?
Thank you. I referred to Rowan House earlier. Rowan House will be more accessible as a result of the refurb. As you know, currently the town hall is having that repair work done to the lift. The reason there was such a delay was the part in getting that secured and resourced. So now that is being worked on, and it does take a considerable time to do. Am I absolutely satisfied that it's the easiest place to get into at the moment? No, but our clear guidance is every building that we have ownership of and is for public access must be completely accessible. So during the period where we were waiting for the lift piece, the lift was fixed to be usable, but it would only call at certain floors. So it was accessible, but it would only get to certain floors. So there was a period, or there is a period now, where it's less accessible. You can still access through the old library, but when we have to consider, and I'm sure the leader will, meetings and making them as publicly accessible as possible, I'd have to refer to officers as to when the work actually finishes on the lift. So I don't know if Richard Block knows the exact date or not, but I haven't got that date.
I don't have the specific date. I'm sure we can share that with members. I'd just add that we are actually also carrying out a full assessment of the town hall in terms of accessibility. We are confident that we have done everything, but to be sure and to deal with those concerns that you mentioned, Chairman, that were raised during the year, that independent assessment that's been commissioned is being undertaken at the moment.
And my final question, the council puts matters of the environment at the forefront of its considerations, and certainly it is the one issue which seems to unite everyone, that we want a cleaner, more friendly environment in the city. I note that on point 10 of your responsibilities, you maintain the council's asbestos register. What progress has been made in removing asbestos and the dangers from asbestos from council buildings under your watch?
Thank you, Councillor. Well, it's a very important matter. That is managed by Colchester Borough Homes on our behalf. So that is a periodic sort of register that is updated and reviewed as we go. If we find something in a new building we did not know, obviously that will be addressed. It will either be managed or it will be addressed immediately. And at the moment, you will know we've been looking at our companies and the Almos. So we are reviewing CBH at the moment. So that comes under part of our review. Whether or not CBH continue to manage that on our behalf will be part of that review, or whether it comes back into us. At the moment, I think you'll know in a busy portfolio, that's something that CBH manage on our behalf, and I have not had any reason to be alarmed by that. So I'm confident from their management of our certain assets that we give them, that's one particular part that they look after confidently for us at the moment. But that will be under the review as CBH's completely holistic sort of review is taking place.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Councillor Sunnix.
Yes, thank you very much. See, you're doing lots of good stuff. The question is, how are you monitoring the lettings on Northern Gateway, and how is it accounted for? And have any updated appraisals been done, obviously in light of commercial property yields increasing and the financial difficulties at Cineworld?
Yes, thank you. That's a serious question, especially in the last part with Cineworld. So we have, I'll take you back that we began work with Turnstone, who are professionals within this type of development. So we've worked with them over time at ensuring we get the best leases we can, the best companies into Colchester to use those particular units, of which there's a particular share of restaurants and leisure use. And there's a key commitment to no sort of retail units and nothing that will duplicate or take out of the town centre to begin with. And then we've also ensured we have property management in there, professional external property management that then take forward that lease arrangement for us. So we're not doing that in-house, we've outsourced that to the professionals. We are near to about sort of 65% take up there, at 65% in terms of getting committed leases. We know that with restaurants, they often come later on once there's still gaps in the market there. They come later, sometimes when you've got a sort of critical mass. So we're still waiting upon completing. Once we get to a certain, it is over 70%, we know we're breaking even, but we also have a clause with Turnstone that covers the first 2 years. Okay, so once that is becoming more established, we are covered for all of the rent income. I'm just trying to think of some of your other questions within. In terms of Cineworld, we're very, very wide-eyed to their situation. So first of all, it was the American part of the business, as you probably know, that was the worrying part. But now Cineworld UK are looking at their assets, looking at selling their assets. At the moment, it is as a cinema asset, and we may look at whether Cineworld are sold to another provider or whether another provider may come in and take that asset. So at the moment, it's very much, we are attentive to that. We ask for pretty much weekly updates. So that's as close as we can be at the moment on that. I don't know if there's anything more. Okay. So David's saying that at the moment, we think we can manage to be profitable without Cineworld, but we do want a provider in there as soon as possible. Anything more on your question that I missed?
Yes. Can you explain how it's been accounted for? Has it been consolidated onto the balance sheet? Has it been reappraised? And because this is a strip lease, isn't it? With the risks and rewards after the first couple of years coming to Colchester.
Yes.
So is it a non-balance sheet item? And if it isn't, why, and if it is it going to be revalued as we go forward? And if it isn't, why isn't it on balance sheet?
I think some of those points are a bit more technical. I might have to bring in Paul Smith, but Paul Cook, sorry, not Paul Smith. Paul T. Smith is not here tonight. He's the one who helped negotiate this. Paul Cook may be able to come in to help. In terms of it, after the 2 years, it's definitely going to have to be clearly accounted on our balance sheet. But CCHL, Paul, if you could explain the difference between the two, that would help me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it might be easier because this has usually been discussed on a confidential agenda as to our budget assumptions and how we're dealing with this. Be very happy to send out a note of clarification after the meeting, Chair, if that would be appropriate.
Yes, that would be appropriate. And we have to remember that the purpose of these cosy sessions with the portfolio holders is to get their view on what is happening and what the successes have been during their tenure. It's not primarily just to get information, and we can presumably ask Paul Cook for those details at any other time. But what is important is Councillor Corey's view on how these are being managed and what he's personally doing to ensure that we get best value for the council. Any more questions?
Chair, sorry, I'll just come back and say what I can publicly in response to as you kindly put it there. I think Councillor Sunnock's appraising it is what we are doing currently because the way the market is and the way Cineworld and that situation. So I'll absolutely promise we will continue to appraise because we have to understand that we've got to get a certain number of leases for us to break even on that site. So we will constantly be looking at the market. At the moment, we have the professionals in there managing that. We will continue to review if we keep it external to us in terms of are they better to, if one of the lease fails, then are they better to bring others in? So at the moment, it is, I'd say, an amber because of the Cineworld. It is an amber because we'd like to get over that 70% of restaurants and leisure units let. But I'm confident in the overall model that we're using. And yes, the confidential side of it, Paul would have to help explain the rest and actually how we are accounting for it in the first 2 years, whilst it isn't direct possible loss to us. That's something he'll have to explain.
If I may add, the accounting treatment shouldn't be confidential. The commercial aspects, I do agree, are confidential and very sensitive. Obviously, confidence is key for these developments, and the confidence comes from the cinema.
Colleagues, questions? Well, it looks as though you've acquitted yourself well, Mark. So thank you for attending for this section. Useful to hear your views on these matters, and I don't think there are any resolutions or feedback that we, as a scrutiny panel, wish to make, other than thanking you for going through those items. We now move on to the next item, which is the item 11, the budget for 2023 and the medium-term financial forecast, which I understand is going to be presented by Paul Cook. But does the leader or our portfolio holder for resources wish to make a few opening remarks?
If I may, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, committee, for bearing with us. We know we're here to help and support. We really do value what it is that we gain from this, all of us, in terms of challenge and next steps. Just a few remarks from me. I think just worth reminding ourselves for any council, including this one, this is a season of difficult, challenging choices. Now, Colchester is in the happy position of having, regardless of the financial season, some huge positives to look forward to. We've got the town deal investments about to unroll, confirmation from all of us, cross-party and with us outside, that these are the right kinds of uses of public funds that will make a difference to life quality and business prospects, which is good for all our residents. We've got the Levelling Up Fund, and I'm going to say again how great a job done by our officers between May and July, and their submission in August was under tremendous pressure. The submissions across the county were done with close cooperation with but led by the county council. And in this case, close cooperation and support, but led by our officers. And I think that's a tribute to them, a moment of cautious pride, if I may put it that way, that we've got the capacity amongst our staff to do such a great job. Many did not get through, as we know. Great that we did. So we've got those good things to look forward to, but we've undoubtedly got a budget full of difficult choices. I can only guess some of the conversations in each of the groups, but I do know some of them within our own and beyond. There are a few councillors who relish taking away, making it more difficult to access a service. We'll hear about that during the conversation, but I want to just paint the choices. The choices were, all of them, equally excruciating. To close Leisure World rather than charge for garden waste is the kind of alternative. Not seriously, deeply looked at, but looked at because we're looking for really significant means of addressing the budget gap. And running down our reserves, another alternative which we knew to be not just unpalatable, but not a secure way of running the finances of the council for the longer term. So I just want to sort of make that point before we get into the detail, that we have both possibility and probability for a positive city council and those we look after, but the choices have been stark. I'm really grateful that in so many ways we've had such a mature response to that cross-party, but that leads me to my final point. The style and the manner, or the way in which we've helped to get to this point of maturity in terms of proposal is going to be one in which we continue. It's going to be cooperative, it's going to be listening, and it's going to be a refining where we can. Those of you who've had the chance to look at this in some detail will understand that some of the propositions for the longer term of 2024 and onwards, which we have to start in the next few months, require debate and discussion, and understanding as wide as we can make it between members and our residents, so that we do this as well as we can. So from my perspective, unusually, the budget that we have, although it is a solid construct that deserves support, will have with it the clear understanding that some revision may be right to make as options and choices get a final review, and as members here or elsewhere raise with us points often of detail, but ones we want to try and listen to. We will wrap that up, if needed be, in amendments to the cabinet endorsed position. So when we go to full council, this committee, members beyond this place can be sure as is possible that we'll continue to do this in the spirit we've talked about before, as cross-party, as on the facts, and as mature as possible. I'll stop at that. I thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you. I just wanted to reaffirm some of David's points and just from my experience explain that this is the most challenging budget situation I've seen in 15 and a half years. I know Councillor Willetts, you've had a bit longer on the council than I have, and I wonder if yours is the same, but I definitely have never been in such a situation where 10 out of 11 decisions are pretty unpalatable to make in order to reduce cost and increase income. So I'd say that this is not a political point. This is simply a point of keeping this organisation on a stable footing, keeping it going. And that means doing less and actually collecting more if possible. So having said that, I think it's also one of the most open budget processes we've had, and we've been opening it up as much as possible. Now, I think there's always a bit of process that means it isn't perhaps completely open book, but I think we've done that. David, again, with your ethos, has done that as best as possible. So I do feel that governance and audit have had a good input into some of the thoughts about how the budget could be shaped over the last few months. I think this panel today have some comments that we can take on board. I will say that the tough and more strategic, practical decisions on direction have been made, but I believe, and David just said it towards the end, there are still small tweaks that seem small to our budget and small to the council, but could be quite big to councillors and to residents that we will continue to be open to. But we had to make the big longer term decisions to secure the medium term financial forecast and to get the acceptance of the Section 151 officer and his confidence, because that officer could be taken to challenge and to court effectively if they pass a budget or they rubber stamp a budget that is absolutely not affordable. So we've done something that secures our future, that is affordable for this year and years to come, but does have some green shoots of investment, does have sensible reductions where possible, and some pressures where we need to expand in some limited services. One thing I didn't say, Chair, in my last report, my last item, was about local council tax support. And I think that is important to add on here, that we are opening that to be more generous than it has been before because of this period that we're in with the cost of living. So local council tax support is a benefit in kind that helps residents to pay for or to pay their council tax bill. Previously, we have always sought a contribution of 20% of every bill as a minimum. We are now reducing that down to 15%, so we will pay 85% of the local council tax rate that the most hard up people in Colchester, those in the least fortunate situations, are being supported in that way. And further to that, the government has given us some further money to help with that. So we are using that in a way to tackle the most hard cases. And our economic solutions team will have a small discretionary budget to use to keep people in their homes, because the cost of homelessness is great, both morally, socially and economically. I'll leave it there, Chair, but I just wanted to add that on at the end, that despite there being hard decisions and increased costs, we continue to help those hardest hit at the bottom rung.
It seems quite clear to me that if people are below the breadline, they cannot pay their council tax. And it seems a wise policy to adjust now in advance of a socially difficult situation, rather than pursuing people for money that they don't have, which is just wasting our time and causing distress to those people who just cannot find the cash to pay their council tax. In terms of your remark about 14 and a half years, this is the worst. Yes, I was elected 6 months before you, I think, but it hardly makes any difference. I mean, if you look at Appendix B, the budget robustness statement, for the last 14 and a half, 16 years, every year we've been making savings of 1 million, 2 million. This year perhaps is peaking at 4 million. But life goes on. There is always a way of ensuring that the council services continue. We've never yet got to the point where there have been some serious loss of service, and I trust that no matter whose hands the council is in, that we will continue providing the essential municipal services and support services by carefully considering the financial position, as has been done this year. So it's a challenge that's always been with us, and I think will always be with us. There'll be no day when we've got so much cash we just don't know what to do with it. We're always going to be under pressure, and perhaps that's a good thing. So shall we now go over to Mr. Cook to have the presentation of the budget papers that are going to council, so that we're in cabinet rather, so that we're in a position to respond.
Thank you, Chair.
Hold on a moment.
Sorry.
Councillor Summers is just asking for a point.
Yes, it's just that I really appreciate the attempts to draw in consensus across the parties. But the detailed budget process has been anything but transparent. And I, as shadow portfolio resources shadow resources portfolio holder have been unable to get hold of the figures I need to really understand the financial position of the council and to really scrutinise this. It's been anything but transparent, unfortunately. I hope we can put that right in future.
Well, I hope we can put that right this evening. I mean, if there is information which members of the scrutiny panel need so that they feel that they can respond positively to the budget, then that needs to be identified and to the extent that it is possible, made known. Leader.
Thank you for the remarks in both senses. First of all, the acknowledgement of how we, and it's more than an attempt in my view, it's how we are working an open and transparent approach. And so to your direct point, I can tell you, you're not seeing less than I am seeing as an illustration. Now you and I have spoken about this several times, spoke about it this afternoon. So very briefly, I'll say to fellow members, it's an issue of timing, I think, William. We made a promise, which we'll keep, which is to provide, you asked for half a day, so you dig into the background in a way that gives you confidence. I'm absolutely up for that. So are officers. I believe that time is in the diary, and I'll do my best to join what I can of it. And I know that Councillor Corey will do the same. So I want to be really clear for the record. We don't squirrel away and keep away. There is a protocol and a process to follow, but our endeavour always is to serve the needs of the whole of the committee, but to serve the needs for information of those who lead on a given issue. And I hope that the promise of time and the diary and a confirmation of what we've discussed again openly, which is that if that further review comes a need either to change our process or to acknowledge that there is something that is worth and right to factor into the post-cabinet papers that go to full council, absolutely we will do it. I doubt, Chair, whether we'll get very far today, but that would be, I hope, confirmation of principle of approach.
I mean, if there are issues which members around from the scrutiny panel identify that they need to know and are not available, then we should do our best to identify them and ensure that that information is made available. If the information is not available, I mean, if it just isn't known, then there's in the world of high finance, there are many things which pass me by and I don't know them. I probably can't understand them. Others can. But we need to take a reasonable balance, ensure that members do have the information which they feel is necessary for a sign off by the scrutiny panel or a sign off by members when we get to council. And the earlier it's done, the better, so that we have no surprises. Councillor Law. Oh, sorry.
Yes, to be very specific, the thing that we need most, and it'll come up when we discuss the Treasury management strategy, is a balance sheet. We need to know what the balance sheet of the council is. To sit here trying to understand it without or trying to get a balance of where we are without that is just, it's not tenable.
It's unusual. Councillor Laws. No, Councillor Lilly.
Yes, and on that point, having a spokesperson meeting the other day, I asked officers, Richard was there, for details behind some of the cuts that have been involved in the neighbourhood services. And I wanted them before tonight's meeting so that we had time to discuss in detail how they're going to affect our services in the area. It's disappointing that the portfolio holder is not here tonight to answer those questions. I know you're very fit and adequate to sit in, but I'd rather hear from the person who made the decisions of the cuts in the first place. And I'm disappointed from officers that I haven't received those figures to be able to make a good educated view of those services here tonight. Why haven't I got those figures? You were there, Chair. You heard me ask the question. It was last Thursday. So there we are.
Yeah, all power and responsibility in the council lies with the leader. And I'm sure he will do his best to ensure that Any information we want is available. Councillor Corey is here. He's the portfolio holder with responsibility for resources. And of course, the budget covers every part of the council. It covers every portfolio holder and almost an infinite number of officers who will have details about it. So what we need to do is identify what it is we need, what you wish to know, and ask the questions this evening. And if you're satisfied with the replies, then fine. If you're not satisfied, at the end of the meeting, we must, when we come to make our report to Cabinet, if we want to make a report to Cabinet, we must capture the feelings of the panel and ensure that they are made known to Cabinet. But it may be, I mean, let's just hold our horses. It may be that all the questions that you have will be answered by the three senior members of the Cabinet that we have before us this evening. I don't want to prejudge the issue of whether they will be able to answer your questions until we have an opportunity to go through it. And I think, first of all, we should hear from our senior finance officer, the general presentation of the budget, and then we will know what we wish to ask about and assure ourselves that it's a reasonable way to proceed. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, on this point, I do support Councillor Lilly that it was raised. The other thing we did ask for was more details as to how the savings on garden waste was worked out. We just had one figure and it didn't tell us how much was getting down there. So I do hope that will be covered in the presentation. Excellent.
We're welcome to ask any questions we like on table D, the savings, table D5, the cost pressures and growths. But before we launch into that, I think we should have the presentation, formal presentation by our senior finance officer, just to sort of set the lie of the land, and then we can identify what it is we need to know and assure ourselves as the scrutiny panel. So can we proceed to the presentation? I know there's a degree of unhappiness around the table, but I mean, let's actually start doing the business. Mr. Cook, proceed, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So I was going to run briefly through the structure of the report without dwelling too much on any particular section. And then, as you suggest, sure we'd welcome any questions. So just in terms of the format of the reports, this is a similar format to that which we've used in the last 2 financial years, and we're seeking to balance clarity and understandability for the general public with providing the necessary detail. As one can appreciate, that can be quite a difficult decision. So any additional information that is required, I think as the leader has already said, we can either answer this evening or provide in a report to Budget Council. And Darren, who is with us tonight, and the team, we have inexhaustible information about every single aspect of the budget, so we're quite happy to provide that if the panel so agrees. So turning to the report itself, go first to section 5. We do try and set out here a user-friendly summary of how council services are funding and some of the accounting nuances. So if it's felt that's not clear enough, you know, we could easily add to that. And then we also set out in section 6 the macroeconomic context, which of course is very important in this budget setting because of inflation, risks, particularly in pay and energy, but also changes in interest rates. So then in section 7 of the report, we set out the council's budget strategy with a particular emphasis on income generation, the transformation of services in the mid and long term, and individual budget savings to bring us back within our funding element, all destined to achieve long-term financial sustainability. Then I would move on to section 9, Chairman. This sets out in summary the local government finance settlement for 23-24. And again, we've tried to strike a balance between giving a guide to the main principles of the settlement that will make sense to the general user, but give enough flavour of the technical detail. Again, you know, we'd be very happy to provide more information in the Budget Council report. So some of the key elements that just draw your attention to in the finance settlement are firstly that government has guaranteed every authority's core spending power will increase between 22-23 and 23-24 by 3%, which is particularly good for Colchester City Council because it compensates us for lost new homes bonus. But also in the settlement, it was announced that we would still be able to continue membership of the Essex Business Rate Pool, and that pools would be available in 3-4 and 4-5, which again has been a big advantage to us. Then in section 10, we set out the main factors in the council's budget. In section 11, we look at budget consultation and budget priorities. And then if I move quickly on to the appendices, Chairman, if you allow me a little more time. Firstly, in Appendix A, we summarise the position on the medium-term financial forecast, which that with 1.7 million of use of reserves in 3-4, we expect to balance the budget. And as the leader was saying, significant progress has been made into 24-25, leaving a residual gap of 800,000, which I think is a level that we can expect to be achievable from past savings performance. In Appendix B, I set out my budget robustness assessment, highlighting some of the factors the council needs to pay attention to. And as you yourself pointed out, Chairman, that it's a high level of savings that is being delivered in 3-4 and 4-5 in these budget proposals, which is great for developing a sustainable future, but will need careful monitoring during the forthcoming financial year to see that those are achieved. And I also point out that the capital programme, following the peer review, is currently being reassessed, fundamentally reviewed. So the figures in the current budget and medium-term financial forecast are provisional, and following the review of the programme, there'll be a full report back to Cabinet and indeed yourselves if requested on a revised capital programme. So then moving on to Appendix C, the Treasury Management Strategy. Again, this is quite a long document. And we've tried to strike a balance between providing the necessary information for the purpose of the strategy and making it intelligible to the general user. We use the format recommended by Link Asset Management, who are Treasury advisors. That's a very similar format as used by other authorities. If we are asked to provide balance sheet figures to augment the statement, we can do so in the report to Budget Council. The purpose of the Treasury Management Strategy is to set borrowing limits and prudential indicators going into 3-4. So there's a limit on the amount of information provided about individual investments and individual loans, because normally we would expect to provide that in the monitoring reports that come through to governance and audit during the year. But again, if that is required, we can provide that. We also set out in the Treasury Management Strategy our minimum revenue provision policy. And I would also like to stress, Chairman, Colchester has no borrowing relating to outright commercial investments, which is the problem that's led a lot of authorities into financial difficulties. That is something we do not do. Then moving on through another 40 pages to Appendix D is the normal technical reconciliation of the budget figures in the main report, which I think members have found very useful in the past to understand where particular elements come from. And Darren is with us this evening to answer any questions on that particular element. And then again, we provide a summary of budgets by service area. We also give more detail on the general fund budgets in Appendix F. We have been requested a subsidiary subjective analysis of this, which I have provided to one councillor this afternoon, with I think about 4,000 different items of data, and we can, if requested, provide that as part of the council papers. Then in Appendix G, we give a statement of our reserves, provisions and balances, which I think show a healthy position. Appendix H provides the allocation of new homes bonus, which, as the leader was explaining, over the last few financial years, we have avoided use of new homes bonus to support the mainstream budget, which gives us a strong position to move forward. And then in Appendix J, we set out the transformation savings from 3.4 and 4.5 with a summary of what the saving is in detail, the expected values, and some of the risks that we think on a fair assessment are associated with making those savings. And these are all supported by equality impact assessment. So I hope, Chairman, that wasn't too laborious an introduction. Certainly, if there are any further information requirements, we'll endeavour either to answer them this evening, or if requested, we can add them into the council budget report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Most of us around the table are old hands at scrutiny of budgets, but I think it's just worth reminding ourselves what exactly we're doing this evening. This is not the forum at which we decide whether any of the budget cuts or the increases in the growth or the way the Treasury management is being dealt with is right or wrong. That really is a decision for Cabinet. We are scrutinising, asking questions about the budget, and our charter is in section 1202 of the Constitution, that all decisions of the council have to do certain things to be good practice decisions, and those are consideration of all the options available, having due regard to consultation, consideration of professional advice from the officers, clarity of aims and desires and outcomes, which clearly members have already spoken about because they wanted further information, having due respect for human rights, which is why we put the equality analysis in, presumption of openness, because the budget should be open, only relevant matters taken into account, and due weight given to material considerations. So those are the areas around which we should be testing the budget to ensure that, in our view, it is a sound budget. And we leave it to Cabinet and particularly to full council to argue which are the dastardly deeds and which are the superb measures being brought forward according to one's political view. If I can start off with a question about the comprehensiveness of the papers we have before us. If we look at the appendices, Mr. Cook, Appendix I is missing from my documentation pack. And I wondered what had happened to Appendix I. Is it a matter which would duly concern the panel, or is it matters which are no longer relevant? Also, reading the documents, we have Appendix J, transformation savings, which comes up with some £3 million, but only £1.7 million is allocated in the budget documents, and there's no reference whatsoever in the budget documents to Appendix J. So I wonder whether you could just clear those matters before we move on to sort of debate the content that we have before us.
Thank you, Chairman. So there never was an Appendix I. It was for clarity to avoid the confusion of I and a number 1. The transformation savings, I think Darren would be able to explain why the total in the Appendix J is slightly different from the main budget report, which I believe, Darren, relates to the savings in the main budget report include savings agreed in previous financial years, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think the 1 point, I'm not sure, Chair, I recognise the 1.7 million you refer to. That might be the use of reserves figure that's in the budget for next year. Because the total savings for next year is 4.6 million that's set out in the papers. And yes, there is a difference between those total savings and the transformation savings, because there are savings in the budget that are being achieved that aren't through the transformation process. For example, the 1.25% reduction in the national employers interest rate, the NI rate for employers, that was sort of reversed by the government. So a good example of a saving that we're achieving, but not through the transformation programme.
Chair, can I just come in? I think it's a matter of language there, because we're undergoing a transformation process on the council. There are some things that are targeted as the transformation outcomes, and then there's also elements where we've had to transform services, which is the wider budget savings. So I think it's an element of language. So perhaps Paul and Darren, with your explanation there, we could sort of asterisk those to make sure the confusion is not there.
Yes, it was purely the Appendix J deals with the transformation cost savings for 2 years, one of which is the current budget, one is next year, for which there was sort of 3 million shown. But I'm sure, I'm just looking forward to the papers, that it's shown as 1.7 million contribution to transformation in the budget papers. But if there is a note to explain that, then fine. Yeah, it's just brought to my attention that the heading, it says transformation budget for 2023 onwards. Non-transformational budget is in Appendix D4, but I don't really follow table D4. I don't actually see it. I just don't understand how those two gel together.
With your indulgence, Chairman, we can clarify that in a note in the report to Budget Council, if that would be helpful.
Yes, it certainly would. So, colleagues, we can either go through the budget section by section, or we can go straight to your points of interest. Prefer it section by section.
I'd actually prefer the other because I think there's so many sections in this budget that we'll need to focus on the key elements. If you wish to bring up items on every section, councillor, that would be absolutely within your right. But I think there's several that would just be saying, yeah, fine.
Personally, panel, my main interest is in table D4, the savings, and what they really mean. You know, our duty to ensure that there's clarity of the aims and the desired outcomes of these issues, particularly the large items at the head of the table. And similarly with table D5, the technical reconciliation of cost pressures and growth, we have the list which tots up to sort of £10 million in cost pressures. And again, my personal interest is in the larger numbers at the top of those tables. So is that a good starting place to look at the technical reconciliation of the savings in D4 and the cost pressures and growth in D5? Is that the area where you would prefer to start your considerations of the soundness of the budget?
So long as we don't forget the other bits, particularly the treasury management strategy.
Yeah, yes, certainly. But we have colleagues who are keen to look at some of the very basics of the budget before we move on to some of the things which I find more difficult to understand. So who wants to kick off on Councillor Smith? Were you itching to go?
I'll certainly start with a few thoughts if I may. I mean, as the councillor who has served the longest period of time on the council of those present, although technically I believe I'm actually the shortest serving councillor in my current stint because your result was announced before mine, I believe, William. I've got to say, this is by far and away the most difficult budget that I've seen. The simple facts that our income is going up by 3% and our costs are going up by inflation, let's be generous and say 10%, means there is a 7% gap. And the only way that gap can be filled is by reducing services that we provide in the shop. We might be able to get 0.5% here and there by some clever footwork. But basically, this is a budget not about what we want to do, but it's a budget about what do we have to cut? Which areas do we cut, reserve the others? And as I think the leader said, you know, when you're looking at a situation between charging for green waste and closing Leisure World, and the figures are probably roughly similar for the two, yeah, that's the level of difficult decisions. So this is never, ever going to be easy. And I do note in section 9.9 that the government says they're expecting us to use reserves. And that's exactly what we're doing. I guess the only question is how much reserves do you use and where you strike the balance? Because a lot of the things in the budget do not tie in with the strategic plan that the council has put forward. Particularly, we talk about the climate emergency. Very important. And yet one of the main areas in the budget, probably the biggest cost saving over the next 2 years, is charging for green waste, which we know if you charge for a service that is free, some people in the current environment will not be able to afford that service. Others will choose not to pay for it. That will mean the amount of green waste collected will go down. The amount of recycling will go down. Some of that waste will end up in landfill. It goes completely against what we're doing as a climate emergency. The cuts in environmental services have much the same impact. So what I'd like to do is to have more detail on some of the figures, particularly in those areas. Because it's very difficult to form an opinion on these difficult choices without seeing the actual figures. For example, if we were to charge more for green waste collection than we were projecting, that would bring in more income. That might mean that we'd be able to make less cuts somewhere else, and each council has got their own list of where that extra would be. But until we see those figures, it's very difficult for us to say, have we got the balance right? Or by running a service, green waste, which still will be losing money, even though we're charging for it, is that where we've got the balance right? So I struggle with that without the detail as to how to do there. I've also got some issues with the equality assessments for those various items. In particular, I noticed on the equality assessments for both the environmental services and for the waste ones, they've said there's been no impact on ethnicity. I disagree. Some of our wards have much higher levels of ethnicity than others. Those wards that have high levels of ethnicity, Grinstead, for example, springs to mind, second highest level for ethnicity, has great levels of deprivation. Arguably, those areas are going to be far more impacted than the area that has the least ethnic diversity, which is Mersey and Tiptree, which is generally a wealthier area. So by imposing a flat fee on a service that was free, we are having a bigger impact on an area that has a higher level of ethnicity. But that has not been picked up at all in our EQA assessment. And I also think that we have to be looking at the EQA assessments a little bit more honest. We've said we've done all we can to mitigate them, and I don't think that's the case. I think we should instead be ticking box C rather than B at the end of it, saying that the negative impacts could not be minimised. I think we should be honest on EQA assessments on dealing with that. So I think it's a very difficult budget to do. And I also hear what the leader said, that this is a budget which I suspect will be changed before it goes to full council, because it's been so difficult to do and because things are constantly changing. And to give one other example of that, we've heard recently the government's announcements of the changes for the waste levy that will produce significant income for councils. There will clearly be some strings attached to that. One of that might be an increase, you get a bigger share of that money if you increase the amount of your recycling. Oh, exactly. That may well change the decision. And can I make one final point about the green waste recycling? And this is more on an economic point. At the moment, we're planning to start charging in January, the period when demand for the service is lowest. As a businessman, you don't start charging for an annual service when the demand is lowest, surely. You charge when the demand is higher. So people don't say, oh, actually, I don't need it at the moment, I can get away with it. You charge it when the garden is full and it's producing lots of waste, and they then say, oh, actually, I really do need this service. It's the same reason why Sky doesn't try and promote your subscriptions for football leagues in June when there's no matches, but it sure as hell starts in August when every sport in the country is hoping that their team's going to do well. So I think there are issues in there that we need to look at. But at the end, we have to accept this is a really, really tough budget. And if anyone is looking to try and score political points, it's an easy budget to do, because there's not going to be one of the councillors who's going to agree with every line in this budget when it goes to full council, much as we might pretend on the night that that's the case, because this is a really big budget, which we're being compelled to do because our income is going up 3% and our costs are going up 10% plus.
On the same issue. If it's on the same issue, let's group them together before we get a response. Councillor Scordis, you were next to raise hand.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I think Councillor Smith outlines the difficult decisions we're making. And Councillor Corey alluded to one of our biggest costs, which is that we have agreed a pay settlement and we are paying our staff more, which is perfectly the right thing to do. Because we're seeing other councils lose their staff because they're not agreeing to those pay deals. But it is a big impact on us. So most of my fears do relate to waste and neighbourhood services. So one of our big, strong strategic aims is about the environment, and it's about increasing recycling. And our recycling rate has gone down. I think it's 52%, I was told recently, which is quite embarrassing, if we're being honest, from where we were. And in one part, we're talking about charging residents for recycling kits. Now, people just are not going to pay for that, if we're being honest. That is shooting ourselves in the foot. And we know that people don't just get these kits for the fun of it. Usually, because of the weather, their kit blows into the road and gets destroyed. Or sometimes some of our staff are a bit over enthusiastic with the green boxes and they do get damaged over time. And that seems an unfair cost to put on residents. And we do say here that they can use any kind of box to do that, but food waste is a good example where you can't really just use any sort of box. So that does concern me, that we are taking a backward step. And as Councillor Smith has made the point, the more we recycle, the more we make in money. Where I believe we should be putting money into, and what we should be looking at, is finally actually having the courage to look at finding residents who refuse to recycle. Because we know, and our staff will know, there are residents that have been educated time and again, and they will either be abusive or they will refuse to actually recycle at all. And with charging for garden waste, what are they going to do? The same people, they're going to put it in their black bag. They're going to burn it in the garden. The situation we had to deal with during COVID, which wasn't very nice. So there's some real concerns I have. What I'd like to see around garden waste as well is when we propose this in 2020, it may be that it's in a bigger scope because we're just talking the budget, but we talked about offering residents, for example, free compost bins to stop some of the fly tipping, but also looking at some of our green spaces where we could look at communal compost heaps. Newtown already has one on Old Heath Rec, which is really good. But for me, there's other areas that should be looking at this, and can our community enabling team and our zone wardens look at this as well? And the other big concern I have, and Councillor Lilly's raised it, we haven't got the figures for where those cuts are coming in neighbourhood services. Are they backroom staff? Are they frontline staff? Are they going to be natural wastage of people taking early retirement? If I'm being honest, neighbourhood services hasn't been performing to the level it was 3 years ago. We're noticing that things are a lot slower to be reported and so forth. And the town, again, is becoming dirtier, partly caused by our own residents or people coming here doing that mess, not our staff's fault. But there are things not being done as rapidly as they were. And we admit in this report it will get worse. And that really worries me, because when people do consider what they pay their council tax for, the big thing is they pay for their bins and they pay for the town to look a nice area. And it's the one area where we used to have a really good reputation. So that really does concern me, Chair, that we are looking to cut our staff there. And again, losing money from recycling by not only charging for it, but some of the other concerns that Councillor Smith and others I'm sure will raise, I will let others speak as well now, Chair.
Councillor Lilly, are you in the same, on the same set of issues before we have a response?
I am in fact stolen all my ideas and speech, but it's going to be slightly different if I may. I totally agree with Councillor Scordus. My reservations are exactly the same in that respect. And it is disappointing not to receive the figures that it says there'll be reductions in staff to deliver the savings in neighbourhood priorities. Our wardens are our heart of our communities, and the Labour group, we were actually looking to improve resources in this area, and because we know the value of them, not to reduce them in time. I saw the great work that we did back in 10, the community 10 work we did working with the police. Our zone wardens worked hand in hand with police officers, and we helped reduce the antisocial behaviour in town by an awful lot. And they were the wardens that were on the streets. And to get rid of people like that, it's not right. I mean, everything that we're doing here is completely wrong, and why we've all become councillors, because we want to help and improve our communities and neighbourhoods. And it has to be said that all of this is a result of this government. I lived through the Thatcher years. I thought that was bad, but now it is incredibly difficult, and it's all caused by this so-called government. They're not fit for purpose. They are the ones responsible for the cabinet having to make these decisions. If you were in power, you'd be doing exactly the same thing, but you won't be publicly blaming your own government. You would have to make cuts like this, destroying councils and neighbourhoods for that. I find it incredible that the government has found hundreds of millions of pounds in levelling up funds everywhere to deal with redesign and roundabouts, and here we are talking about getting rid of people and putting them on the streets with redundancies. I am disappointed in a few of the things, and the fact that it has to come up with some cash making schemes. I would have loved to have seen the workplace levy brought in on here. It's something I would have done or wanted to do a few years ago before a change of administration. It helps the environment. It'll raise money for the city council as such now, and it's a no-brainer for me. Nottingham have increased all their eco stuff they've done through the workplace levy. That's not included in here, and that's a real shame that you haven't done that. The leasing of privately owned car parks is another one that should be done. We looked at it a few years ago in parking, that the NCP and other people that got their business on our land, Nottingham have done it. We could have charged them at least money coming in. They also reduced their car parking fees to match our ones. Another great bonus for the city. That's not included in here.
Yeah, Councillor, we have to focus on.
Well, I'm focusing on that, the fact that we hear cuts, whereas other ideas could be done to actually raise some money for the budget. But I'll end it there, Dennis. Okay?
No, I continue if you've got points. But
well, they are my points.
What we're focusing on this evening is what the administration is proposing to do in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, thanks to your government.
Whether we believe that what is proposed holds water. Now, there are many. I could propose a whole series of things that I would like personally to do, but I'm not doing so because this is not the right forum. In this forum, we're looking at what the administration have proposed, and we are analysing, will it work, will it not work, rather than introducing brand new ideas.
Well, they're not brand new ideas; they've just been ignored.
Well, they're not ideas that are in the budget. And if you want to sort of privately mention to the leader that he,
I mean, they all know my thoughts of that from 5 years ago.
Yeah.
They still remain the same. Well, okay. Well, let's focus on what's on here. I'm disappointed that I wasn't provided with the details of that. And that's a real shame because officers of this council are fantastic. And we haven't got those tonight. I can't make a decision based on this because we don't know the details of that. We'd agree for this to go to cabinet and then they can turn around and change their minds. What are the details? Who are being made redundant in neighbourhood services? Are you getting rid of zone wardens? That's the one thing I want to do. Where are those details and the others? Thank
And
you.
that is a
Yes.
perfectly valid question because there is a proposal to reduce neighbourhood discretionary services.
Yeah.
And we have to assure ourselves that what is being done is a valid part of a comprehensive plan and not something which will go off at a tangent and wreck what the administration is proposing to do.
Yeah, we don't
That's
do
what
that.
we're
And I
doing.
mean, it's a basic idea. Details to be provided.
Thanks very much, Chair. Mine's a very, very brief one about staffing as well, but on a different front. Mine's about customer service. In 7.2, it says we're looking at reducing operating hours, overtime and working hours of staff in customer service, which is obviously the front line for a lot of people. But then further down in one of the appendices, Appendix J, it says that a review is being done on the current opening hours for the telephone contact centre, which will include response rates for telephony and emails. But it is likely there will be an improved pattern of opening hours and increased response rates. If you're reducing the hours of staffing, not giving the option of overtime, and I worked in customer service when I left school, and overtime is vital to actually get the job done. How can you possibly improve the response rates if you're reducing staffing hours, basically? So that's my only point.
Thank you. Can we persevere first of all with the proposals to introduce charges for green waste and the impact that this is going to have? And clearly there are concerns of members that if charges are made for green waste, as Councillor Scordis very clearly put it, it will be disposed of by some people in rather different ways, which could verge on the antisocial. But at the same time, there is a proposal to reduce the neighbourhood discretionary services, which may well cover the people who would have been investigating fly tipping, investigating people burning rubbish to the annoyance of their neighbours. So I think what we're looking for here is to ensure that all these issues are linked together in a way that holds water, and we're not introducing one policy which needs another policy that is now reducing staff to actually make it work. So it's looking for how the thing is going to work in the round. I don't know whether you wish to answer this, Leader, or whether it's a sort of technical question from Mr. Cook.
The three I got in particular, and not only the spirit of reaction, which we said at the beginning, I'll repeat again, we're going to take into account as we solidify what is a substantial set of propositions which need, Chair, I absolutely take the point we do, to make sure that it does mesh together. We don't want contradictory intentions here. We don't think we have, but there are fair points and the sentiment is understood. We're in the same place here. We're having to do, as Councillor Smith has said, what has to be done. And Councillor Smith will bear with me if I say this is a good budget in the sense that it grips this financial year, what's going to take a couple of years to deliver. Completely get it. It's bad. It will feel bad in terms of having to deliver uncomfortable changes for residents and through councillors and otherwise. Could I take the last point, please, Sam, which was around customer services? That all the propositions are in the round. They're going to be taken forward and developed. So in a sense, I ask members to bear in mind that we'll be back to this again in the months that lie ahead to sort of share in the right place, in the right forum, but when we need to, what it is in a rather more refined kind of way. But the principles start with always what's good practice, what's best practice, and what are we learning from elsewhere? Customer services have changed hugely. We know that there is a gap we can close in terms of the use of digitization, and there is a question always about how well done. But if we take the best of experience elsewhere, and we do have high quality services already, and we shape and frame the ability to ask a question and get one robotically, but still have people available who can come back to you, we think we can strike, this is how I understand it, that balance better. And that will save us money while still ensuring a quality of service. There's a point behind this, which is the importance of speaking to someone when you need to, which is why, seen it this week, we're sending people out across Colchester in pop-ups, our economic advisors, our cost of living service, to ensure that people can talk face to face. So it's a balance to be struck, Sam. And what we are suggesting is it can be refined, tested as we go, still be good practice, still provide a good service. Yes, so thank you. Yes, chat online. So there are some gaps we can fill. And some people prefer it that way. They don't want a long conversation. They want to ask a question and get an answer, get sent to a link, get sent to a place rather than necessarily a person. But it will remain, a comprehensive service. It will remain high quality intent, building on a good record. And we're just going to do some learning and some revision. The other points are more, with respect, complex. And I know that members have several times tonight acknowledged it. So let's start with what we know. And I'll ask Richard to round this off. So on garden waste charging, what we've seen so far is an intention to frame a service around practice elsewhere. Worth reminding ourselves, we're not the first to this. Over half the country charges for garden waste. Darren should be kind enough to tell me, I think it was your mum who gets charged for it. So I'm sure you've had your own conversations. Good or bad, there's a conversation to be had. There is an acknowledgement there is an environmental risk, and I think it's a reality that unless you can so shape the sum of your services, you're going to end up with rather more that's not going to be collected. And that's an accepted downside. But over half the nation does this already. Our understanding is most of Essex, for example, will by the end of next year. Now, I say this not to take away from the fact it's still uncomfortable to do, and we ought to do it well. So that's the point I was making earlier. The detail of the scheme is something to be worked up, confirmed and debated. I am interested in the point that's made about whether it is practical to try and look for some degree of concessionary scheme arrangement. That, I think, is a good point we're happy to take away. And that might cover Councillor Smith, but we have to be, as Councillor Fox was saying, to be careful about drawing conclusions about ethnicity based upon location, because circumstances, I know you'd have said this, vary such a lot. But the point about ensuring we are testing ourselves, and frank, I absolutely completely get, and we must make sure that the EQIs are reflecting that. So no, I accept that point. My point merely is that this is difficult territory, you will understand. We'll make sure we go back to go and look at that. This is not a rebuff, Councillor Smith, it's an acceptance of the point. In terms of that proposition, we expect to be, the officers suggest, charging around what most do. There are some who charge a little, there are some who charge a lot. We'll be somewhere in the middle of the pack, but we've got to work out that scheme yet. And that's why it doesn't apply into 2024. How fast forward in 2024? At the startup rate, there is a conversation to be had about the need to scale up a service. This is one complexity to add in the mix of a wider review about waste services. And you and I have had the side conversation, which is if we're looking to make real progress for this financial year, is it possible to bring forward income and actually increase what income we get in to make scope for changes elsewhere to relieve, for example, pressures on neighbourhood services. So, Chair, it's your point about linkage. So we're not there yet, but it's a solid proposition based on good practice elsewhere. As I say, we're not the first to this. We're actually amongst the last third, the last 40% of the country that's going to apply this. My only other response will be on the neighbourhood services point, which is it's very outline, again, what I see, but we understand the emotive response because it's a practicality, the quality of our wardens and our staff and how immediate is a service that in your street, the removal of waste, the cleaning of streets, all these things matter. My understanding is the proposition is for around 10 staff to be not necessarily made redundant, I hasten to add, but 10 staff to go. But that is one of those conversations that lie ahead, depending on the feedback from this committee as to how much, if you look at the sum of all the changes put there, which ones of them would you most wish us to have a look at afresh? we're absolutely up for that to make this conversation real, but it would be the current proposition would make a meaningful reduction in the number of people, and therefore it follows, unless we can improve the quality of what we can get from kit and equipment, as well as the efficiency of the service, it's going to mean a reduction. And Councillor Liddy, I completely understand that, but we're listening to the tone, the reaction and the view against the facts. If Chair, that helps us on those 3 points, could I, if I may, turn to Richard, who we all know has a deep background in some of these issues, and ask him if he'd like to round that out to help the panel to get to an understanding here.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start with a more general point from an officer perspective, and say how difficult this has been for us as well. Unprecedented in terms of a budget gap, and we've had to look at everything and put everything forward in terms of all services. If we don't, then what we put forward in the services that are actually looked at would be far greater as a proportion of the budget. Neighbourhood services is an example. I absolutely get the concerns tonight, but in expenditure with these savings, there will still be 13.8 million gross expenditure in neighbourhood services. So it's still a significant level of spend. And if we kind of don't at least consider these services, then obviously the sorts of decisions that we'd need to put forward to Cabinet and yourselves would be far more extreme in other areas. So I just wanted to make that general point, because none of this is easy. I wanted to re-emphasize that. If I just start with garden waste, obviously the leader has said this is a well-trodden path in terms of others. So we do have some reference points, including the top league of recyclers in the country, the top two, who I've just checked, both charge for garden waste, 60+% recycling. So there must be a way to charge for garden waste and still achieve high recycling rates. As the leader has said, I think that we need to, before a scheme is finalised, bring the detail back. Something like this isn't some one line in a budget council report. It would need to come back to Cabinet, the full details of the scheme, and listening to concerns and issues that have been raised. So I don't necessarily accept the hard link between recycling and charging. Others seem to be able to preserve very high levels of recycling, 60% plus, with a charging scheme. So we can learn from them, I'd suggest. I would also emphasise this is sewn up in the waste strategy conversations, which you'll be having as members over the forthcoming months, and having a holistic service that ensures we maximise our rates of recycling. I think the leaders explained some of the assumptions behind garden waste charging. In terms of uptake, for the first year, it's conservative, it's 5%. I have to say others, including one neighbouring council, are forecasting a far higher uptake. Perhaps we've got it wrong, perhaps we should be more ambitious in terms of the assumptions. But if we are, that first year uptake, the first full year uptake of 800,000 increases considerably. So your yield in terms of income increases. I'd emphasise, I completely accept the point that if when you look at this like a business, and you consider startup times, you may consider an alternative time to December. We have these costs in our budget already, so any income we gain is going to be beneficial to the overall financial position for the council, accepting the difficulties with introducing a scheme. Because I do appreciate when you've got a free service and you move to a chargeable service, it is a really difficult decision. So those are the points I'd want to make. Middle of the road charging is around £50 a year. That tends to be the kind of middle of the road. There are others who charge far more within Essex, around £90. I think Harlow, quite a deprived area. It'd be interesting to understand their take up as well in terms of some of the equalities issues. Again, I think we can learn from others and map through whether there are any unintended consequences around some of the equalities concerns that have actually been raised. So I'd leave it there on garden waste and see if there's any questions about anything in addition I've raised before I deal with neighbourhood services.
Councillor Smith.
Sorry, yes, first of all, the 5% uptake, you're saying that only 1 in 20 households will participate in this scheme. Have I got?
No, I think the financial assumptions are based on for the first year, 5% uptake. So actually quite low on the basis that we've been conservative. Again, if there's a feeling that actually we can yield more, and certainly, and I don't want to name the council because they're taking this same process through the budget process at this stage. A neighbouring council who don't charge, they've actually put a more ambitious take up, and they've based their budget assumptions on a more ambitious take up.
Sorry, I want to try and understand this. You're saying that the projection is that 19 out of 20 households will not take up the paid scheme. Am I understanding that correctly? No. So could you then explain what the 5% uptake is?
The 5% uptake is what we are allocating into the budget, not what we would anticipate in terms of uptake in the scheme. And I think what we're trying to do is to be as Richard Block said, to be conservative in terms of its impact on the finances of the council. Now, one of the recommendations from this committee might be where we think that actually more people would take that up, and you should be more ambitious with what you put into the budget from that. But it's I think we would anticipate significant numbers of people taking up the service. But what we didn't want to do is to over allocate budget finance into the budget. Absolutely. And that we would, be looking to really support members of the community who perhaps might be living in those most deprived areas, for them to be able to take up the service too in the initial year. So I think it's about ramping up the service, but it is about saying we don't want to over allocate funding and then be in a position where the Section 151 doesn't feel we've got a robust budget to put forward to full council.
Thank you. Right. So the budget projection is that only 1 in 20 households in Colchester will pay for this service in the first year. Right. Okay. If that's the assumption, that seems a very low level of take up. And if we're providing a service that 95% of people in Colchester aren't using, question, why are we providing it for the other 5%? I think that 5% figure looks very low to me. And I would like to see more figures from what other councils have done in their first year charging to see whether they've got it. Also, if we're looking at charging, have any of the councils gone round a route of charging people a different amount based on their council tax band? Because that might be a way of addressing some of these issues. I appreciate that council tax band is not a direct correlation with income, but it helps. And also it would reflect, I suspect, the usage of the service, because you're in a small council tax band, you're likely to be in a smaller property, which is likely to have a smaller garden and therefore make less use of the service. Is that something that could be looked at? I am a bit concerned that we weren't told before tonight when we were asking for the figures what they were, because if, for the sake of argument, we say 5% is too low and it should be 10%, that would mean an extra £200,000 in the budget, which would mean potentially £2,000 less of very painful cuts elsewhere. So I would put a mark down that I think personally 5% is too low. But I'd like to see figures from other councils that have introduced it so we can do it to see in their first year what they got.
As I understood it, this is for the first year, which is, you made the point earlier on, is starting in January when people haven't got much garden waste to actually fill up if they take the service. So it is income accruing over a relatively short part of the year, where, as you've already said, it's not a particularly attractive service to take until you're prompted by the avalanche of grass clippings later on in the year, which would presumably cause people to rethink about demand. But I'm with you about getting more information on this. It does seem to be a bit of a punt in the dark at the moment. Oh, sorry. Leader.
I just want to thank you for the conversation, which has affirmed, I think, an instinct which we've been talking through the last few days. I think the way this is expressed can easily lead to misunderstanding. The assumptions on service were 21%, I think, for a whole year. But there is an absolute caution about the rate at which, for reasons to do with that wider waste review, Chair and members, which we will be bringing back round again, about the rate of progress and the point well made about the beginning of the financial year. Now, my understanding, Richard can correct this, otherwise I'm sure he'll leave it as I say it, is that 21% is on the cautious part of the spectrum, but it reflects a look at other service experience. So what we would suggest is, if this is your decision, is that you recommend to us to revisit both how we express this, so that we don't have that misunderstanding about take up, and that yes, we do look and see whether or not the service thinks it can do better in the tail end of this financial year, the first quarter of 24. And because, as has been said, the assumptions drive your connected decisions. And we are very clear that neighbourhood services is a particularly sensitive area. So if we legitimately, please understand, we don't want to do what's so easy to do, which is overestimate income and the introduction of a complex service. But if we're able to legitimately and share the calculation and the understanding with the committee, move the assumptions around. I'm being told to refer to page 69. Thank you very much, but I'm not sure what's where. It's the 21%. Thank you, the 21%. So if we can make some legitimate adjustment, we'll be happy to take a recommendation. That's in the spirit of the conversation. And as I say, it might make it easier for us to respond to member concerns from this panel and elsewhere about some of the other changes.
Thank you. Just so I think I've now got it. The plan, the projection is 21% take up, but in the first quarter, you will only get a quarter of that. So that is your 5% take up. Thank you. That clears that point up very nicely. Thank you. But yes, Chair, I do share your comments about if we'd seen the figures, I think we'd be in a much better position to understand what that is and the impacts of what that's going to happen.
Some of them are in the paperwork, but there is something about going over this enough and often enough to feel comfortable that we understand this. So I'm not going to say look at paragraph X. I'm just going to say there is a conversation to be had. We're starting now, and I've addressed the wider point when it comes to anything that's a missing point in the out of past briefings, these papers, which I think we need to pick up. Then we'll obviously go back and look at that. And the responsibility is on us to ensure this is as clear as it can be. We're doing our best to do that. I hope that much is being demonstrated. Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, the leader is almost inviting us to make a recommendation in this area, and a nod is as good as a wink. I accept the point that the details are something which will be coming out of all these schemes will be coming out later on in the year, and there will be an opportunity for the scrutiny panel to look at the details. But I think Councillor Scrutiny's point was more of the principle that if we're making these changes, we can anticipate that a very small percentage, but a troublesome percentage of people may well start putting green waste in their black bags, filling them up to capacity. A very small percentage may start fly tipping or burning their refuse to avoid paying what the administration considers is a reasonable charge. So we're not looking for the details of how it will work, but we're looking for a statement in principle that neighbourhood services will not be denuded to the point where we will not have sufficient people to ensure that the changes work well, and if people stuff lots of green waste into black bags, something will be done about it. And if areas are filled with smoke in the evening, there will be an officer available to go and find out who's doing it and issue the fixed penalty. So I think we're just looking for an assurance leader that in principle, these issues will be connected together. And we won't get to the point where we've got a good policy going in one hand, but we've got no staff to enforce the downside on the other hand.
If I might, Chair, I think we recognise that risk, and that that risk is in the paper, and I think that is something that we'd want to bring back to scrutiny when these plans are more formulated. I think what strikes me about this this budget in its difference to budgets in the past is that because of the scale of savings that we're requiring, we're bringing more detail about what those changes might be to you at this stage. But of course, any changes to significant changes to the waste system would normally come to scrutiny once those plans are more realised, and I think we'd want to do that in the year ahead when those plans are provided, so that we can precisely look at how we might mitigate some of those issues, such as people putting green waste in a black bag or burning waste, and how we might tackle those things. I think one of the other things that we might end up seeing as well is a change in human behaviour, which could well result in people changing their gardens so that they produce less waste anyway, and then we might have fewer lawns but more because people are looking at how they're responding in their own ways in their gardens to the climate emergency and the biodiversity impact, and so we might see a change in behaviour from residents in that respect too, and there's certainly absolutely a way that we could encourage some of that behaviour ourselves as well.
Yeah, but with due respect, there may be technical papers about what you're going to do later in the year, and it may have been considered in great detail by officers and so on. But this evening, our duty is to ask you questions to ensure that what you're proposing, whether we agree with it or disagree with it, that it is properly joined up. And I think that those are the assurances that we're looking for. And using this as an example, if you decide to charge for garden waste, then you must recognise that there may be a compliance issue and an enforcement issue. And if you don't recognise in principle that that has to be linked together, then our duty this evening is to say, well, this isn't quite right. Whereas if you say, yes, it will be dealt with, in principle, we will make sure that enforcement matches the possibility of projects going off, then we say, yes, fine, we have a rounded policy to go forward on. We still might make one or two comments, but we're not saying this is something disastrous. We're saying that it is possible to make it work, and that's all we need to do for the budget.
And I think we accept that in its entirety. I think that's exactly, we accept everything that has been said around the challenges with some of these changes.
Okay. Are there any other matters that we want to talk about? Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted for a view on line item 32, environmental health service reduction, 50,000. We're still on D4, technical reconciliation of savings. Now, forgive me, but I'm not an accountant like my colleagues to the left. But from my understanding here, planning washes its face. It produces a slight profit, if that's the right word. But environmental health services doesn't. So I can see why you might have a challenge in this area and seek to make a reduction. I just wondered, was there a mechanic in which fees could be increased so that there wasn't a reduction in the service? And I say that in the context of a growing city with changes to the way in which the high street operates, more and more eateries, and also beyond the city, we're a very, very geographically spread out place. And I know that residents really value the idea of going to a restaurant or a pub or whatever, and knowing that it's regularly inspected, and that standards are exceptional. And I think that's a really important function of what the council does, and it's largely done quite quietly, actually, along with having regular conversations with our licensed taxis and other licensable provision. So I see a reduction there. I just want to know that we're sure that has to happen, and we haven't explored the idea of increasing fees to protect the service.
Chair, if I may, that's my particular area, so I can come in and answer those questions. Just to reassure you, in terms of the environmental health function, that doesn't relate to licensing in this context. So we have increased licensing fees and things wherever we're legally able to do so. This relates to private sector housing, environmental protection and food safety. Private sector housing will be increasing their income, so that's their portion of this saving. Environmental protection and food and safety do not, unfortunately. They're some of the regulatory areas that we're not allowed to charge for. That has been lobbied several times. So this is more around doing things differently, and where we've got a couple of part-time officers leaving the organisation, they won't be replaced. And we're looking more to use different systems to be more efficient, but where we can, we will increase the other fees.
And this is so important when we consider that there are eateries in the town that have got 0-star rating, first time ever an environmental health officer has given a 0-star rating to a restaurant, protecting the public magnificently. Any more questions from members of the panel? Yeah, can I just move in with a couple of questions then? I tend to look at the larger quanta items in each of the major tables, and on table D4. The second point is recruitment freeze. I think the scrutiny panel has in the past commented on the practice of we already build in to staffing levels an assumption that there will be vacancies occurring during the year, which will not be need to be covered out of the total pay pool. And that has at times worked, at times it's caused difficulties which have been reported under key performance. If we have a further recruitment freeze, are these issues going to compound up? Will we see not only vacancies not being filled, but an edict to departments that they have to leave a greater proportion of their number unfilled if vacancies occur? It would seem that there's sort of a compound build-up of the problems with recruitment, which is going to be even worse with 500,000 coming out.
If I may, Chair, and I recall the previous discussions about the vacancy factor allowance within this panel, and just to be clear, the vacancy factor allowance is rather than a deliberate decision not to recruit to posts, it's a reflection of the fact that often there's a gap between someone leaving and then securing someone to fill that particular post. And there is a provision built into the budget, which Darren Brown can explain far better than I can, on how that works. But this is something slightly different. This is a deliberate consideration of every post that becomes vacant within the organisation, and our group managers together assessing whether we can absolutely get by without recruiting to that post, either for a defined period of time or on a longer term basis. It's, you know, again, none of these savings are easy, I'd suggest, and they need to be dealt with care. And there'll need to be a detailed assessment on each post on whether actually, you know, if we don't fill a post, there'll be particular health and safety implications or service implications. But again, in terms of our turnover rate of around 15%, across our pay bill, the £500,000 across a year is quite conservative, and we think we can achieve it. Thank you.
It's achievable, but what is going to be the impact on staff and staff morale?
I was just going to come in. I think Richard's explained it quite well, to be honest. We will always assess every post. So if we feel that there's been considerable reduction in one area where we perhaps need to turn that around and expand the team, then that will change. So it's not a complete blanket freeze, as Richard has said. In terms of staff morale, that is often, we hope, where that's natural wastage, which is a horrible term, but where people are moving on, perhaps to retirement. So at the moment, in terms of staff morale, people understand, they do understand the budget, they do understand we're trying to pay those that we do have well, and where we can relinquish people through retirement or moving on, we will. But we absolutely, as Richard said, assess every department. And I think what you were suggesting earlier, I get. We don't want to just say, oh, there's a vacancy there, therefore we keep pursuing that area for vacancies, because, yeah, you can absolutely get into a sort of tunnel vision there. And we are trying to avoid doing that. But it's a good point to take back, Richard, isn't it? That to make sure we don't just continue where vacancies are offered up again and again.
Mel.
If I may jump into my day job, Chair, temporarily again as a group manager, just to provide some reassurance. There are some fundamental principles that have been agreed, such as, you know, if a post is an income generating post that generates more income than the cost, we will recruit. If there is a corporate risk related to the role, we will recruit. And if the post is externally funded, we will recruit. So that there is some real principles around this freeze. If it doesn't meet any of those objectives, it would undergo stringent tests within the organisation.
Councillor Stannocks.
Yes, I'm very pleased to hear this conversation, because the biggest worry I have about this budget, I was saying this to Richard Block earlier today, is that it's a sort of salami slicing budget where we're asking staff to take real pay cuts of quite a substantial amount. I think it's 12–14%, something like that, over 2 years. And we are banning overtime, and we are cutting down on fixed term contracts. And I just feel we are not reducing the expectations of them proportionately, the pressures we're putting on. And I think that's really serious. I'd far rather see the council doing less and doing it better, people able to answer the phone and people being able to do their jobs. Some of the officers I'm seeing have got just so much on, and there's so much bureaucracy flying around. And I think that if we really want to have a prospering council, we've got to be a little bit more strategic, a little bit bolder about making decisions, maybe even bold enough, unpopular though it may be, to see some redundancies where people are weak, and ability to pay people more when they're strong. and trying to manage it in a more business-like way. You would destroy a business if you started doing all these painful overtime bans and recruitment freezes. I think it's a really, really important point.
Leader, then we're going to take a break.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Councillor William, that those remarks could be mine. I see this similarly, but actually so do we. This is the difficulty with the headline. The reality is, as Mel described, it's going to be thought for. We think about that 500k, my rough sums are that's equivalent broadly to about 15 people. We've got an organisation, I think it's about 750 or 700 or so full-time, and then a couple of hundred who are employed on other bases. So it's small, but it's a mindset. And that mindset, I think, is absolutely right to have, which goes, be thoughtful. There's some choices here. We've got a significant turnover, much greater than I thought we would have, 15% a year. I'm told that's not dissimilar to practice elsewhere. Surprised to me in the days so old, where when you joined, you stayed, right? 40 odd years, yes, I know. So I think that I hope that members will take encouragement for the sum of our responses. This is going to be, it's an indicator of how we're going to run, which is business-like, looking at, whilst we make some significant changes, looking at for opportunities where we go and not having an embedded assumption that when somebody goes, well, let's do and get another one. It's to help reinforce thoughtfulness down the organisation whilst we make changes. Last point, if I may, William, was absolutely that point about the way in which the organisation works. As somebody's been strangled by bureaucracy, we know that even with what we must do, there's sometimes opportunities to do it crisper, faster, better, and that has to be part of what we do when we look at organisation. You might recall we've changed the top team structure. Pam Donnelly wanted to do that. We supported doing that. Some of that is about ensuring you don't get 3 people, I'm not saying it's them, to a meeting. It's about looking at responsibilities, where they lie, competence training, and that is going to go down the organisation. That's where we are. We'll leave people charged with the responsibility they can deliver and with the resources they need to deliver it. And that has to play into that wider conversation about efficiency, effectiveness, and your point, what we continue to do and what we don't do.
Chair, could I take 20 seconds, if that's okay? Thank you. I think just to repeat Mel's example, it's great to have you here as a group manager to express the principles with which we're following that. And I think it helps Councillor Sunnex's answer. But the second point I make is this, for the first time, is where we are saying we are accepting we are going to have to do less. And I think for a council, I know you haven't been here as long, for us to be saying that is quite a step. So we are along those lines now, and we have to be. But we probably can go further, but we are accepting that, and we're trying to ensure staff accept that, so there's less burnout and sheer. And the capital program is one example. Again, we're going to have to do less, because unless we're creating income where we can, but we have to do less because we're trying to do too much.
Good that there's a sense of realism. And with that, can we break for 5 minutes? Right, I trust we're refreshed. Are we back online? Order, order. Order, the troublemakers. On table D, we've looked at quite a few of the top priority issues. I would appreciate just a bit of reassurance or clarification on two other points on D4. The first was item 6, CCHL management fee reductions to reflect additional project management fees. Governance and audit was all over the CCHL issue. And the question I have is, given that organisation is in a bit of turmoil at the moment, is it realistic to expect them to do more with a lower management fee over the course of the next year? I don't really know how fast their recovery is going to be. And that seems to be a bit of a risk, and I wonder whether you have any comments on that.
I think governance and audit did a really fantastic job last week in terms of looking at the challenges that there are going forward with CCHL. But I think that this is all about trying to clear up where the responsibilities lie between CCHL and the City Council, and I'm sure that when governance and audit sees the next stage of the reports into the review of CCHL, that we can all be reassured that this is the approach that that it's right to take.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I do notice that one of the impacts is that it would mean that CCHL will make a smaller profit. But of course, that means they will be paying less in corporation tax to the government, which is money going out of the organisation. So I suspect that will balance itself out. So I think I have some reassurance that that particular item will not cause an adverse financial or business impact on that organisation.
Or we could increase it to the point where they make no profit whatsoever and pay no tax whatsoever.
I would, avoiding saying that with accountants in the room who might point out that that would be illegal, I believe, something to do with transfer pricing and what have you.
Good. So the collected wisdom is that it's not that the organisation is not in such turmoil that they would not be able to make this fairly minor adjustment taken overall with their total project portfolio. And then item 10, turnstone income, that was a bit on the terse side, and that completes my top 10 on this table. So is that reliable income increases? Are we sure that that's going to come in? What's the probability of it failing?
Yeah, Paul Cook probably best on that one if he's still there. But I think, as I think I said in the portfolio holder section, that there is greater risk there with Cineworld, but we have guarantees. Yeah. We do have guarantees with Turnstone in initial years, but Paul Cook, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So in the budget and medium-term financial forecast, we have made prudent assumptions about Turnstone, but I think this is something perhaps I could explain more fully, Chairman, in the note we're going to provide on a confidential basis, as it is commercially sensitive information. Thank you.
I'd just say I haven't seen, and that would be great, Paul, to see that note. But I did recently see an update from Paul T. Smith. This is so confusing. So many Pauls about. This is a very modest assumption, given both the guarantees for 30 years and everything that's coming out of Turnstone, judgment and sign-up rate. So in my view, is a sufficient assurance for now, but more information to come.
Yes, it was just the terseness of the item which really an untutored observer means absolutely nothing.
Thank you, and that's the point to be taken away. It should be at least understandable in that first sentence.
That concludes my concerns and questions on the earlier table D4. Can we look at table D5, because that's the matching table, the cost pressures and growths. My first question is on point 1, general inflation, and not so much in next year's budget, but looking at the medium term forecast. Is it reasonable to assume that inflation is going to come down at the level shown in the budget papers? There would seem to be a significant risk that the quest for greater pay will continue as stagflation comes through into the economy, and people find that although they're getting more pay, they're having to pay more prices, and that the pressure on pay might not decline as rapidly as is indicated in the Treasury Management Report. So what confidence do we have in the limitation of inflation for next year and particularly the year after?
And I think we have to go on, some of the paper has the OBR forecast in there. We have to take some of those judgments on the macroeconomics. I get your point on sort of the micro elements of with stagflation, how would it affect us in terms of our own workforce? We have 4%, 3% going forward in terms of staff pay, which in terms of OBR figures makes sense. But I see what you mean about when it comes to our local economy, how those effects. I think we've responded quite strongly compared to other regions and compared to our own region as a town. So hopefully we will sort of follow the figures that the OBR have put out, but I think that's a risk worth highlighting. I don't know if officers want to add anything more on that.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think with the difficulties of fluctuating inflation, we will need to monitor very carefully how pay is performing generally in local government for the remainder of 2-3, but also during 3-4. It's not clear cut how things will progress, so we'll try and pick up any potential variations in 3-4 monitoring, and then before too long we'll be coming back to 4-5 budget setting. So in preparing the central case, which we set out in these papers, we also have in the background a favourable case and an adverse case that we've used in modelling. So we have been working quite hard at this, but I think you're right in saying it is an uncertainty and a risk, Chairman, and yeah, it's something we'll just have to watch very carefully as we go forward. But I think we're doing the best we can at this stage. Thank you.
Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I share this concern about where are we about the next year. We are not expecting huge inflation there in our budget. The OBR does show it going down, so we've done the correct thing for technical budgeting. But I think we ought to be very, we ought to have plans. You know, slightly you feel that with this budget, the dart starts tomorrow. And that could be with gobbling up 2.4 million of reserves, including the amount we already expected this year. I don't really have a feel. One of my big concerns about this budget, I don't really have a feel about the level of reserves, about whether we have enough. But we could find ourselves, if there's public sector strikes and so on, could find ourselves with big pay inflation next year. And we ought to do some sensitivity analysis around that.
Leader.
Agreed, and we are. A conversation we had yesterday, including Darius, you as part of the alumni, and it could have been William with you directly. Now the opportunity was very much around the value of going back to that left and right of arc set of assumptions, which we published some time ago. And as Paul Cook pointed out, some of that work was a few weeks ago, a month or two ago, and since then we've had the government settlements, so some of the uncertainties have been locked down, but there's still a value. So we're going to do this, and then we'll share it in looking, as I say, at favourable and less favourable assumptions. We think we're pretty central. The last time there was a collective conversation was that we were taking less optimistic views than the OBR. Practical views, we thought of what inflation would be in its key drivers of cost to the council. But we're going to, as I say, refresh it. So there is some sensitivity analysis done before. And that always makes me feel more comfortable. I think it will the committee to see where, how narrow is the band of our central assumption. And it shouldn't be that wide at this stage when most of the factors are now known.
So this might be a recommendation that it should be in the risk register rather than cabinet positively reconsidering the issue, and it's under constant watch. My next point on D5, on 3 in D5, that is the point that I incorrectly referred to as 1.7 million earlier on. It's actually 1.4 million. Shown in table D3, and there was no mapping on how one got between the 3 million shown for 23-24 in Appendix J and the 1.4 million shown in the cost pressures and growth table. But we're going to get a note on why and how. And the pensions, is possible just to say a few words to reassure us on items 5 and 7 of the cost pressures and growth table, both which concern fairly large amounts on pensions at a time when significant savings are being made in other areas.
I'll defer to the Section 151 officer if I may.
Thank you, Chairman. So we're seeing in 3.4 the results of the March 22 actuarial revaluation. The first item, it is financially advantageous to pay deficit up front to the LGPS run by Essex County Council. In terms of the actuarial valuation, the scheme deficit has fallen, which is good. So our deficit payments will be smaller over the period. However, the basic contribution rate has increased because of various factors, such as changes in life expectancy, investment performance. So those are the two elements. And again, if it would be helpful, Chairman, we can provide more detail in a note with the papers to the Budget Council. Thank you.
Councillor Sykes.
Yes, I'm very confused by the pension accounting. So we got in the financial accounts and the draft unaudited accounts in 2021, we got £107 million pension deficit, a bad news item. And in the reserves in Appendix G, I think we've got a couple, I haven't got it in front of me, a couple of million positive, a surplus, a reserve that we can use. And I just don't know how to reconcile. And then suddenly we've got an extra cost coming in of 836,000. So where are we? Is that 107? I guess my question is that 107 million deficit in financial accounts? Is that when are we going to have to pay that?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have the exact figures to hand, but the deficit is a long-term deficit. So in the note, we can set out the repayment period for the deficit, but then within each 3-year period, Councillor Sunnox, we have to make an assessed payment towards the deficit to eliminate it over 20 or whatever the number of years is. So various options are offered to the council, either to pay each year or to pay at the beginning of the 3-year period. And if we calculate the implied interest rate in making the payment at the beginning of the 3-year period, it's a financial gain. So that's what this particular payment is. But we can set all that out in more detail in the note, Chairman.
Can I just come back on that? If 836,000 is the payment for, is that for 1 year or 3 years?
Darren, are you able to just refresh us on that? I think that's for the 3 years, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the 3-year. That's the 3-year upfront payment to Essex County Council. And as you say, Paul, we can either pay an amount each year, but by paying 3 years upfront, we actually get a discount and pay less, which generates a saving. So we pay the 3 years upfront, and that's what we use the pension reserve for. Councillor Sunnock's in Appendix J. So we put money aside each year into the reserve. We pay the deficit payment out of it, and then we put some money back in the reserve to meet the payment in 3 years' time again.
Okay. I mean, my question is, if there's a 107 million pound deficit, we're going to take an awful long time to pay it off at 836,000 for 3 years.
I think, Chairman, it probably would be helpful if we update that in the note, because I think the figure in the 2021 draft accounts was a figure from a previous actuarial valuation. So there are a number of factors affected the deficit in the March 22 valuation. So despite all the economic problems, the stock market performed very well over the period. So returns exceeded expectations and life expectancy reduced. So that meant the deficit was reduced. So there's a combination of factors which we can set out in this note, but the 107
once again
would relate to a previous valuation, Councillor Sunnock.
Once again, we need that balance sheet. I can't resist it. We really, really need that balance sheet.
What I'll just come in and say is that I think what Paul has accepted here is if we can explain the methodology, the way in which we pay down on our pension. I'm sure Councillor King can tell you, because he was at the committee where it's discussed the Essex, because it's the local government pension fund sits with Essex. So they're the ones who do our investments. They're the ones actually who could show you the whole balance sheet, which again, Councillor King is actually scrutinising his county council role. So what we're doing is more of a bit like the collection of waste and the disposal of waste. We're doing the smaller part in making sure we're committed to making our payments, and we're doing it in the most efficient way here as possible, which is paying that early that lump off so we get a discount. But it's actually the management of that is with Essex. So I think we need to explain the methodology of why we do what we do, but that 107 million and the scrutiny of that, we can attach appendices of the Essex meetings. I think will probably be the way to do it.
I have to admit, I think we're looking at this in a very narrow way, and that there is a problem, or there's a big balance sheet item there that is fundamentally affecting the future of the council. What I'm hearing is what I would have expected. Normally, pension fund deficits go up when negative interest rates are negative, which when real interest rates are negative, which they are now. So I'd expect that to have gone up, and then I would sadly expect it to have gone down due to COVID, because mortality has been high. But none of this can we see since March 2021. None of it can we see because we haven't got a balance sheet. I haven't seen any pension valuations. There might be some knocking around, but we can't see that in our balance sheet because we haven't got a balance sheet.
Chairman, with respect, we do have a very comprehensive actuarial report. An actuarial report is produced for each member of the Essex local government pension scheme, of which there's several hundred. So that report would set out all these factors. So I don't see any difficulty in principle why that couldn't be shared or salient factors from it. So all those calculations are fully substantiated by the actuarial report that we have, and we can share the detail at an appropriate level. I mean, it's about 60 or 70 pages long, the report, but as you wish. So we definitely have, you know, good validation of what the factors are in making that calculation.
Chair, can we avoid strangling ourselves on this? The assurance given is we're following proper process and protocol. I hate it, no, wrong words, but one way of listening. I found the Essex Pension Fund highly enjoyable and intense, William. You'd love it. You know, it does my nut in, but it is interesting. We are looking at death rates, you know, so who's not interested in death and survival? Anybody here not interested? Please put your hand up. All right. This is an award-winning scheme. It's very, very well run. The protocols apply to all members, of which we are one. I have had many doubts, but not about how Essex Pension Fund is being run. And what they do, amongst many other things, is they look at the health of each member of the scheme, and it's kind of a cross-check that what they hear, what they see is the same. I'm absolutely sure that this is in the right kind of shape. I suggest that we get an explanation. If necessary, officers can ask Essex Pension Fund to give a brief commentary themselves. But unless we're doubting the whole of the Essex Pension Fund, then we have to accept there is a translation from their view to our application of it to our local finances.
Sorry, I don't want to go through a 60-page actuarial report. I really don't. I just want a balance sheet.
A briefing note will be produced, and it won't be 60 pages, and it won't be a balance sheet, but we do need just a little help on that. But in the meantime, I've heard nothing which suggests that the sums put in the cost pressures and growth table is in any way unreasonable. Councillor Smith, unless you're going to suggest to the contrary.
No, I fully agree with that. It's just that I understood that it was the Essex Pension Fund and not the Colchester Pension Fund.
Right.
You know, because all the councils in Essex, I believe, are members of the same pension fund, which is run by Essex. So I suspect a lot of the deficit is actually across the entire fund rather than for the individual councils. And I believe Essex County Council have still to produce their accounts. So presumably they have the same issues that we're having with auditors.
They do, and of course across the country the same. But there is a point of agreement between us. The information that's available should be shared. But let's please not go into that. Your point of clarification is correct. I have to sort of say that death and disease will of course help because our investments are doing quite nicely.
Good. And no one's questioning item 12, which is the audit fee of £150,000, which begrudgingly is rightfully in table D5. Do members have any other questions on table D5, which is the cost pressures and growth? And I mean, the remaining essential part of this budget, which is 10 million cost pressures, 4 million savings, and 6 million coming out of balances. If we can just look quickly at the table Appendix G, which is the reserves, provisions, and balances, which shows where the balance between those two is coming from. I have a question on the business rate reserves, where we're drawing 4 million of the 6 million from the business rates reserves. I presume there is a good explanation of why it's now safe to take so much money out of the business reserves, which go back some time to when there were lots of appeals and so forth. But could we just have a note of reassurance that this is a wise and sensible policy by such a large amount at this time?
Thank you, Chairman. So business rates are accounted for through the collection fund system. So there can be timing differences between financial years on income received, and we use the business rates reserve to smooth out those variances. We have agreed that we will provide a more detailed table on reserves, provisions and balances with not only the expected 31st of March values, but the movements in and out in each financial year. And we can add some notes to that if that would be helpful, Chairman, of the sort of main reasons for the movements in and out. So, you know, I hope that would resolve that issue. Thank you.
So, colleagues, do we have any further questions on Appendix G, the reserves, provisions and balances? So we've, Councillor Sonnocks.
Yes, I have got the promise of a route map showing us how the reserves move over the year, and it's something I regard as, you know, with the way the accounting works here, is actually the reserves that constrain us. So having a proper understanding, and I rarely personally, I don't understand this bit of the accounting, but it would be really, really useful to have a training session for councillors on the reserves, what they are, how they were created, how realisable they are, getting a sense of whether we've got enough reserves and whether we can go on gobbling them up over the years. All those things are part of fundamentals of the judgment as to whether we're setting prudent budgets or we're being whether we're doing, you know, the dark begins tomorrow.
Chair, we have a prudent level, which is around 2 million that we must meet. And that is a sort of local government stipulation. And Paul was about to come in. I'll let you come in shortly, Paul. We also have I should have said this half an hour ago, a treasury management training session coming up as well. And we could add into that about reserves. So reserves, we have so many reserves that are allocated, insurance purposes, repairs and maintenance purposes, business rates, etc., pension contributions as well. So there are reserves and then a small amount of unallocated reserves. They are all listed, but explaining what they are is important to know whether we've got flexibility or not, what they can be used on. Some are very specific. For example, you have a GOSBEX reserve in there that has to be spent only in a certain way because of how that was allocated in the first place. And using money and allocating this field gate key reserve, which is used for the work, but we've used some of that in other places. So as you acknowledged earlier, they're constantly under review and will shift and move. Paul, happy for you to come in. Perhaps the suggestion of adding that onto the treasury management session and briefing could be useful. Over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. I mean, I don't think, Chairman, I've got much to add to that very comprehensive summary, but we'll investigate whether we could provide that training as part of treasury management. I think it might need to be a separate session. We'll certainly do that. And the other point I wanted to make is it can be difficult to compare with other local authorities because obviously some other authorities are quite coy about what reserves they've really got, and it can be difficult to make comparisons, but we'll do our best to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so the panel has looked at the various components of this budget, the proposed savings, the proposed costs, pressures and growth, and the reserves. We've had reasonable explanations on all of those points. We have a list of additional briefing notes which have been captured by the clerk, and we have some potential recommendations which we will need to consider. The one remaining issue then is the Treasury Management Statement, which in agreeing sort of shuffles all responsibility onto the shoulders of the councillors. Councillor Sykes, you had some questions on the Treasury Management Statement.
Yes, I'd like to. I don't know where to start, actually. I think this is perhaps something that could be treated as a blank check. I don't quite understand how the authorized limits. I think what we're saying here is that we're authorizing so much borrowing and then giving the Section 1.5 officer permission to borrow up to that amount, which seems to be more than we need to borrow. And when I look back, I don't have a balance sheet, so I look back at 2021 and I find some things that really concern me in that balance sheet, which is that we've got 32 million of Public Works Loan Board borrowing, and that reconciles to what the public loan. But you see how desperate I am to try and understand the finance. So I've actually had to go to the PWLB website, and that figure's confirmed there. So that's a good figure. Then in addition to that, there seems to be another 40 odd million of borrowing, and the amount in the notes is slightly different from what there is on the face of the balance sheet. And that is described as money market borrowing. And in that money market borrowing, in the note, it discloses a mark-to-market gain or loss. I can't remember which it is. And this looks to me, and then I combine that with looking at 89.8 million of short-term investments we have in the November one of the Treasury management reports or monitoring reports we got, 89.8 million sitting on one side of the balance sheet, big amounts of money market borrowing sitting on the other side of the balance sheet. Are we looking at sort of almost a banking operation? And is that banking operation profitable? How can it be profitable when we're told that the deposits we have are earning 0.7% basically? That's again in the November figures that we were given. And then our cost of borrowing on the other side is about 4.2%. So how is that sensible to have so much on deposit? And is there a way we can improve our management? And there's a couple of £1 million there of interest improvement if we look at it. So what I'd really argue is that we need to see the balance sheet. We need to see those accounts. We should have published them. Legally, we should have published them. And we need to understand what we're doing. We need to be able to understand whether we can reduce those money market borrowings and thereby save a lot of interest costs.
Councillor Corey.
Thank you. I'll come in, and then I'm sure Paul Cook would like to have a conclusion to it as well. I fully understand the points that you are putting forward in terms of the concern and the principle. Some of the detail will go beyond some of our understanding. What I will say is that in terms of the interest rates on borrowing, those are longer term fixed borrowing agreements that we've put in place compared to the short term, as you say, smaller yield. And if you can help us to understand how to increase that yield, or let me know as well, I'd be happy to know. I do trust the officers in the efforts that they put in, and that shorter term investment does turn us a profit, as you say, but you suggest that there may be ways in which it could increase. What I've said to you and will say publicly is that this strategy is a strategy that we can go back to, and we can continue to review. If there are ways in which members believe that we can actually make a greater set of income projections, then I'm open all ears to hear that, and I'm sure the officers will be too. What I would promise is that we do take this. This is, as I said to you earlier, the budget is different in a sense that yes, we can make tweaks, but if that budget is set for next year, the next administration have to go on and deliver that. This strategy, I believe, is, well, it's continually reviewed. It does come and gets monitored here. But a shorter period, I suggest over the next 3 months, we look at it and we see what other ways in which, from your point of view, from the outside point of view, we can make changes. Of course, there are local government restrictions upon it and things that perhaps from inside we need to discuss with you. But I'm open all ears to ways in which our investments can gain greater yields. But I'll hand to Paul and then hopefully back to you. Paul, please.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. So in terms of the borrowing responsibilities of the Section 151 officer, those are set out in the council's financial regulations approved by governance and audit and the council itself. We have endeavoured to improve our treasury reporting to governance and audit. So, for example, at the November meeting, we provide a lot more information on premature redemptions, more analysis of the debt portfolio. So we accept there's always room for improvement, but we think we have made substantial strides in that direction. I think, as Councillor Corey was saying, you know, it's important that we come back early in 3-4 with an update, because, as it explains in the budget papers, we haven't finalised the capital programme. Following the peer review, there's a full review of how we manage, fund, monitor our capital programme. So that, if I could just take a couple of minutes, Chairman, really is the driver to most of these indicators, because firstly, we calculate how much capital expenditure we expect to have over a number of years, then how much of that capital expenditure is actually going to be funded by borrowing, which is the change in the capital financing requirement. And then that leads in turn to how much money we physically expect to borrow, both for the general fund and the HRA, which is the genesis of limits such as the authorised limit and the operational boundaries set out in the report. And we have a number of prudential indicators as well that restrict our treasury activity, such as the percentage of debt that can be carried as a variable rate, which obviously is more risky, the percentage of debt that's in fixed rates, the maturity profile, and some affordability calculations. So in the treasury management reports, the 2-3 figures are derived from the provisional accounts. We can provide more information about the individual calculations. But again, Chairman, as I said at the start, you know, we've always tried to strike a balance between providing the necessary detail, but also making these reports user-friendly to a wider audience. And we have used this format, the link format, for a number of years now, leading to successful treasury results. So yes, we can provide, you know, more information on the basis of the calculation. As was mentioned earlier, we've got the member training on treasury management from Link coming through shortly, and we will report back in Q1 of 3-4 as Councillor Corey has committed, because we will have reviewed the capital programme and we can update on interest earnings and results. On interest earnings at the moment, we're currently placing 3 or 6 month deposits at nearer to 4%. So that is currently helping with the council position. It's a time of volatile interest rates. So as part of new SITFA requirements, we will now be reporting to governance and audit quarterly on treasury performance in some depth, along with the normal revenue and capital monitors. So as Councillor Sunnox says, you know, there's always room for improvement, and we would hope by enhanced reporting in 3-4 there'll be every opportunity to examine ways to improve our treasury performance and generate savings for the council. Thank you.
I mean, understanding the treasury stuff, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to know how much cash you've got in the bank and how much you're borrowing. I don't know that, and I can't see it. And the signs that there's almost a banking operation going on within the council that that is not visible to us. And I'm really worried about it, actually. We need to see those accounts. We really need to see those accounts. I think councillors and everyone's exposed if they're trying to block the accounts being seen. No, and I know you don't, but this is, you know, we can write pages and pages and pages of treasury reports, but if we haven't got those accounts, they are the cornerstone of financial control. And until we can see those, I don't think we're going to make progress.
Leader.
I just want to set your conclusion that until you and others see together what we have, then there will be some doubt. I completely accept that about where we're at. Although we've had the conversation elsewhere about the fact that repeatedly this council has shown itself not to have a problem in its operations. We've repeatedly shown, confirmed by internal and external audit, that our accounts are a solid creation to be trusted, and the differences year on year are minor. In fact, yes, we've been commended, but I want to respect the concern. My suggestion, because we're not going to resolve this, I think we can agree tonight. The point about accounts and our positioning, very little difference, I think, from many across the country has been said repeatedly, but the concern I understand. Well, there was no point us shaking our head at each other, it won't get us anywhere, and it's also won't be heard. But let me make 3 suggestions, Chair. The first is we look to do what we've already promised, to provide a confidence building conversation without constraint. Secondly, that there is a proper process here. This comes to governance and audit on a quarterly basis, which I think is absolutely proper, with, and I hear it, I've seen it, much more depth and understanding, and there's a lot of lingering on this by members because frankly it requires it and it interests us, if we're really honest. That is, I think, the proper place for that conversation, and no doubt you could arrange to be there if you so chose. But I want to offer you one extra thing, Chair, which is some of this conversation suggests real doubts about the probity of officers. Allow me to finish off the point, William. To those of us who've seen this cycle go through a few years, and for me it's just 5, this is an unusual degree of concern expressed, and that's your right. My obligation is to even handily respond to that, which is what I'm trying to do. So allow me to say the 3rd point, which is what I'm going to recommend. I had a quick word with the portfolio holder and yourself, Adam, and you, Richard, is that we get an external opinion from those who set and ensure the enforcement of the rules, SIPFA, with whom we have, as we can, both access and have a relationship. So I would volunteer that we get a view on our operation, our rules, the way we describe treasury management, so that we can, for the moment at least resolve some of the doubts that you, I hope it's not more widely, but you and others may have about where we stand. That would fit into the natural cycle then of G&A, because we'll get that as soon as we're sensibly able. I will support that because the transparency principle and ensuring that members feel they have access and assurance when it's appropriate, but it has to be done respectfully in balance with all other business, and there's a lot of it.
No, but I don't think there's any point in repeating myself. I just can't understand why we won't publish those draft accounts. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with the auditors. We have them, we're told they're audit ready, and I just can't understand why they're being held back. It makes me really nervous.
I'm not holding back. Let's be quite clear about this. None of us here are holding back. We're taking the advice about the appropriateness of when they can be. My position, personal position, is repeatedly said, share what we've got. That challenge is for the chief, for you, Richard Block, with Section 151 officer, but there is a process. We are being frank, we are being open as much as we're able to do. I don't want to repeat myself.
Okay, is from a scrutiny point of view, is this a showstopper in the production of a budget? We have to have a budget. There's a legal requirement that we must have a balanced budget. Cabinet is suggesting a balanced budget. There are concerns around the periphery that there is not understanding. Not that there's no suggestion there's anything wrong. The suggestion is that the Treasury management statement is not clearly understood, and that understanding could be improved if a balance sheet was available. And I think as chairman, I accept all that, but I don't see it as a showstopper. It's something which needs addressing, but it's not a showstopper. In fact, my view, personal view, and you can tell me to go away, is that including this much detail in the budget paper, while it goes along with a policy of let's explain everything and show everything we've got, a lot of it is not immediately germane to the setting of the budget by the council. So I think we have two quite separate issues here. One is the need to, as members, to understand the Treasury management statement and to assure ourselves, without any evidence that there's anything wrong, but to assure ourselves that everything is right. And there is the other issue of nodding through the budget this evening. And I would suggest, in view of the assurances given by the leader of the council, particularly the option of an external opinion, that we perhaps need to take the risk on this issue and say the budget looks okay, without going to those matters. We just accept the assurance that we're going to look at it. We may be wrong and come a cropper, but there are many issues of risk around setting a budget, and we have to accept some of those risks. We can't know absolutely everything and assure ourselves of everything in regard to the budget. So if we can accept that position, that the Treasury management statement is an important issue in our understanding of the budget, but the fact that we don't understand some technical details doesn't stop us saying that we have a balanced budget, which forms the basis of going forward in the next financial year. Albeit there's lots of work around all sorts of issues to do, which would increase our knowledge and our understanding and the confidence that we have in the reliability of the budget statement. I have one question on the Treasury management statement, and that's on the capital expenditure borrowing needs in paragraph 2.2, where there is a sudden wild fluctuation in 25-26. And I just wanted assurance that this is not going to cause any significant problem in ensuring that there is a smooth management of the council's capital expenditure over the next 5 years.
Sorry, Chair, could you guide me to the section of the report you're referring to?
Page 110, is it, Chair?
Page 31 of 226. There is the statement of capital borrowing need, which shows significant fluctuation between 2 years, which is probably accounted for perhaps in the next presentation on the housing revenue account. But just checking that that this will not cause any perturbations of Treasury management.
I don't expect so, Chairman. I mean, I must say I'm not happy that it's suggested at the committee that we are running a banking operation in Treasury. I find that remark very difficult to accept, but no doubt we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, I have an assurance that the sudden change in the year 25-26, 26-27 is manageable within the Treasury management processes.
So I believe, Chairman.
Councillor Smith.
Yes, sorry. I think Councillor Sunnox is probably not aware of the Western Isles Council, which was at one stage running a very unsuccessful banking operation, which ended in serious financial difficulty. And I'm sure you were not making any suggestions at all that we were in that position, Councillor Sunnox.
Chair, if I could just move on. I mean, I'm sure Councillor Sunnox can answer that, but just to the point that you're making, I think Darren Brown will be able to explain the HRA situation. But I believe that that is a change, basically us reacting to government changes is what that is there. And as Paul Cook said, he's comfortable with it. I think that's what it is, but I would have to get more detail. And I can understand why you're concerned about that drastic drop.
We may be advised in the next agenda item. So, yes, banking.
I just need to clarify what I meant, and I'm not possibly suggesting any impropriety. Absolutely not. I'm saying that the size of our deposits on the one side and our borrowings on the other side seems to be very, very high, like a bank. I'm not saying that we've become a bank. I'm saying our balance sheet is so big that it's looking like a bank. And it doesn't need to be. Or the question is, does it need to be that big? Why do we have to have nearly 90 million of cash deposits? Why don't we pay back some borrowing and save ourselves some costs? That's the question. But I don't know what the answer is because I can't see the borrowing. I'm not trying to undermine or to question the integrity of officers. Absolutely not.
So there's no suggestion that we're running a banking operation. And it's not wholly relevant to the immediate commenting on the balanced budget which Cabinet have produced. If there are no more comments on the substance of this particular agenda item, my notes show that we are expecting to have briefing notes on the MTFF position on pay inflation and the assumptions. On the question of the balance sheet, Appendix J mapping, pensions, and an update on the table on balances to bring it more up to date. And there may have been a couple that I've missed on the way. In terms of recommendations to Cabinet, the first area where we seem to be heading towards a recommendation was on the green waste charges. Where we were asking or are asking for further information on the take up, the assumptions, particularly in regard to the council's climate emergency and environmental policies, the environmental services and the neighbourhood services, and whether they will be, in principle, able to support the change in the style of green waste collection and the charging. We express our concerns about the equality statements and particularly in regard to flat fee charges on the different ethnicities and their understanding and ability to pay. There was a question, or there was a statement early on which we all nodded about, but we had very little discussion, and that was by Councillor Scrutiny on the matter of allowing any old, not charging for recycling kits and allowing any old container to be used, which I think quite a few of us wondered how that is going to work. And I think that was sufficient of a note to Cabinet that if our people are going to collect waste in a easy and reliable manner, moving to any old container may not be the best way to do it. And we just like that rounding off to ensure that it is a policy in the budget which is capable of working in the longer term. We were going to ask that the matter of pay inflation over the next 2 years should be considered in greater detail in the risk register. I'm not sure whether that's a recommendation to Cabinet or whether we just resolve that should happen. Probably we should.
Chair, I believe it is in there, but to put proper scrutiny, further scrutiny on it, bearing in mind our conversations. So I believe it is in there because I've talked to it, but to put more focus on it, absolutely agree.
And the final point is that the scrutiny panel welcomes the leader's recommendation that there will be an external opinion from SITFA on the Treasury management statements. Are there any matters that we wish to recommend to Cabinet or report to Cabinet which are not covered in that list? Or are you happy that we go with that list? Councillor Smith.
I think we should also recognise the extremely difficult financial circumstances that the council is in this year. That has been something which has come throughout our discussions. I think in fairness, whilst we're making all these comments about them, we should also recognise this is an extremely difficult year with income rising at 3%, inflation at 10%.
Yes, we can add that as a precursor to our recommendations. I think that's generally known. The budget is never easy, and it's more difficult than ever this year. So if we agree on those, they're a bit flaky in terms of the wording, but I'm sure there will be some elegant prose on the table by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
I shall do my best, Mr. Chairman.
Good.
I thought we'd just done something about overtime.
It's superb to have such a reliable democratic services backing up the panel. So with that we close on that item. It's 21:15. Do we want another break, or can we go straight on to the housing revenue? Right, crack on with the housing revenue account. So we're now moving on to item, whatever it is, if I could find the agenda, which I can't, but the next one, yes, item 12. Paper found. Housing revenue account estimates, which hopefully will be a bit simpler than the main. So we're on to Darren.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I know a number of panel members are familiar with these reports, so and conscious of time, so hopefully it will be quite straightforward. I just have a brief run through, if that's okay, and pick up on the point you made from the previous question on the Treasury management strategy. So this report sets out our rent proposals for 23-24. As you know, previously government have had a rent policy of increasing rents by CPI plus 1%. But given high levels of inflation this year, the government have introduced a rent ceiling of 7%. So for all councils, that's the most you can increase rents by. It would have been 11.1% under the previous regime. No news yet what will happen for 24-25, if there'll be a rent ceiling for that year. We don't know yet. The paper also sets out the proposed management fee for coastal borough homes and the position of our balances, and the 5-year medium-term financial forecast, and a refresh of our 30-year HRA model. There has been a lot of other policy changes from the government, but the HRA has been really significantly impacted since this time last year because of high inflation and energy costs. So similarly to the general fund, they have had a big impact. Rising interest rates on any new borrowing we do, as I think as Councillor Croy said earlier, our existing borrowing is all fixed long-term low rates, so it affects our new borrowing. And obviously, as I said, the imposition of the rent cap has had a big impact. So our asset management strategy has been reviewed, and we've included the outputs in this report. Just moving through the report. At paragraph, sorry, apologies, I haven't got a page number, but at 5.27, we just set out a prudential indicator, which sets out our interest cover ratio to give an indication of our ability to meet our interest costs. We set a local target of around 1.5. Some authorities do set a lower target, but we set that kind of guideline, and it's around about that level. But you can see it just starts to drop off a little bit into future years. So I mean, what that's a result of predominantly is because of those facts I said. You know, the rent cap's had a big impact on us, and high inflation also. So what we're seeing, and I was trying to set it out in the very last appendix, in Appendix F, is we've tried to show what our debt curve, our ability to repay debt theoretically looked like this time last year, what it looks like with a debt cap and without a debt cap. And so you can see that impact that the debt cap has had. So what we're actually proposing to do is to officers are going to undertake a review of the HRA this year, very similar to what we did when we had the 1% rent reduction. So we'll go through, look at some of those investment options. Are we going to look at the size of the capital programme, similar to the general fund, and just have a general review, just to make sure we can get the HRA sort of back on track to show at least a healthier debt curve over the next 30 years. So that was, so I move quickly on to the next report, next appendix, Chair, or do we to pause the questions?
Pause for questions at that time. It always seems to be a bit of a controversy when we look at any ceilings on rent increases, because if we were on the side of the tenant, they look spiffingly good, particularly at times of financial hardship. But if we look at it from the point of view of the council, it doesn't look so good on the housing revenue account. But it is a government introduction, so we can note it, but there's nothing we can do about it. Are there any other comments?
Yes. Sorry, I have one question about the Appendix A to this, which shows that we're paying a management fee to Colchester Borough Homes, 4 million, and then management's costs of another 6.5 million. Sounds like an awful lot of money. That's 10.5 million of management costs, is about £2,000 a home. Is there any duplication in the, I don't know what the two different costs represent, and is there any duplication? It does sound an awful lot that every single council house is costing us, not to repair, but just to manage, is costing us 2,000 quid.
I will come in, this is not under my portfolio, but I don't think that is the right way of understanding it, and Darren could come in. What I would say is, even what we are doing is going through a review at the moment anyway, but the management fee, there's management fee for our housing, and then there's management fee for our programme of capital works. So I think if Darren can come in and explain how that sits, I really do not believe 10 million is the understanding of what we pay for our council stock. So Darren.
Okay, yes, Chair. So there is a table at paragraph 5.14, which sets out the overall management fee. It breaks down the management fee to Colchester Borough Homes. So actually, that the 4.8 million is just the bit that relates to the management of the it doesn't include the capital investment programme or the repairs and maintenance programme. It's purely on housing management. So that would be the cost of Colchester Borough Homes running that element of their company as an organisation. And doing things like rent collection, tenancy management. There are some. I need to think. It's probably easy to give you maybe a separate note to the panel as to what sort of things are in there, because the alternative on the management costs, the 7.6 million, what that is, that's all the costs the landlord costs that the council incurs. So it will be things like all the utility costs at our shelters, housing schemes, it'll be all the grounds maintenance budgets across our housing land. It will be all the recharges that the council's general fund for support services makes to the housing revenue account. So we can provide a breakdown, but it is quite a big number. I do know that Colchester Borough Homes do benchmark, I think it's through Housemark. So I think they would definitely have some information, you know, in terms of their performance and cost.
If I could, Chair, they absolutely do. And that is, again, this is all about the right place to do this. This is given a very robust review. I certainly attended the last one. And as a shorthand, what I saw across that independent scorecard was simply put relatively high performing for relatively low cost. So that gets into benchmarks in other local authorities and other commensurate organisations, and that might be some assurance. No doubt that could be dug out if required.
And that appears every year when CBH do their performance review. In fact, sometimes the half-year stage as well. So that there certainly is benchmarking going on, and it's generally available. Are there any questions on this so far? Can you continue the next section then, Darren?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So on the appendix, the housing investment programme, as I just said earlier, this report is based on all the investment needs from our refresh asset management strategy. It includes the investment proposals that Cabinet have previously agreed in terms of new build and acquisitions. and we are showing significant levels of borrowing over the next 5 years. But as I said, this will be reviewed as part of the review of the HRA, just to ensure its affordability. We're also including a provision for future years for the continued investment in our sheltered housing refurbishment programme too. And I think I would just point you to, Chair, to appendix, the appendix A of this report, the very last table, and I think this will answer your question on the Treasury Management Strategy previously, where there was a big increase in borrowing in 24/5 and 25/6, and actually it is HRA borrowing. So you can see, if you look sort of down the table, you can see very bottom row, new borrowing 35 million and 42 million respectively for those 2 years, and that is, majority of that is linked to the Heart of Greenstead scheme. So when we're anticipating building out all the new social housing units of the Heart of Greenstead, that'll be funded through borrowing and some government and some grant.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So the Treasury management system can accurately forecast what's going to happen and where the money's coming from. Yeah, I'm happy. Okay.
Yes, I noticed this paper was it's here as a cabinet paper. It's not actually in the cabinet papers for tomorrow, I don't think. So sort of some clarity about whether it's actually going to be approved, and is there any point in approving it when the capital expenditure review is coming so close? And when it does come, I think we've really got to do some appraisal of this business of buying market housing and seeing if we can't do social housing anymore. I'm not saying we shouldn't do social housing. I'm just saying the way we're doing it seems to be incredibly expensive, and we really need to be looking at some better ways of doing it.
Chair, if I may, just to help us along, I'm very conscious that all of us will be, this is very late, but the point's a fair one. We've acknowledged in the papers to say this, that there will be a review shortly, given the connecting circumstances, that we can ensure that that point of how does that policy still stand test can be part of that review. Refers to the earlier paper we've just endorsed.
One tiny point as well was using the right to buy receipts and using it in a timely fashion, which pretty much done as much as we can now. So that will reduce that particular policy, but it still will be reviewed.
I mean, the way I'd look at it is we should use the right to buy receipts, because that's what they're there for. But to be going out and borrowing money at 4.2% cost of capital and then investing it at 1.5% is wasteful. Unless we can, or if it's necessary, it may be necessary, but there must be better ways of doing it than doing that. Really, we will just drain the HRA away if we don't find a better way.
The viability point of the HRA and its need to stand the tests of both changing government policy and circumstances, is set out in the papers. Your point you made before on the response from colleagues. Response from colleagues is that there is a social policy here, but I don't want to repeat because we're taking more time. The point's been made that we'll pick this up when we go back to that review, William. Chair, you've got Darren.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to make the point to Councillor Sullins that it is on the cabinet papers tomorrow night. It's agenda item 12.2. So 12.1 is the HRA estimates report, and 12.2 is the housing investment programme. So it is on the cabinet papers for tomorrow night.
So should we really be recommending that it be approved, or shouldn't we be postponing it until we have the capital expenditure review?
It's your recommendation to make as a committee, and we will obviously look at them thoughtfully. Yeah, it's about your choice, Sean.
We have no sort of technical issues on the current snapshot of the housing revenue account. I mean, there's some long-term financial issues, but in terms of the housing revenue, the income, the expenditure, the deficit, and the capital improvement programme all seem very straightforward compared with the revenue account. So unless there are sort of specific issues on the cash flows for what is a ring-fenced account for housing, then I don't see what recommendations we need to make.
I agree, Chair.
So we note the figures going forward to cabinet, and they're not part of the budget per se. It's a separate item. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. Work programme, item 13. Owen, any changes to the work programme?
No, I've got no major updates on this one. I think members will be glad to hear. Just to confirm that if everything goes well and goes as scheduled, we'll have received briefings by every portfolio holder by the end of the year. So we've managed to get those in. And also to give assurance that I'm working with Lucy Bredman and Tracy Rudling of Community 360 to prepare the report for the panel on the One Colchester partnership. So they're going to be doing the work, putting that together and giving a more holistic view of the arrangements there, both governance and what they're covering as a partnership.
Sorry. Thank you then, colleagues. If we accept the work programme, no changes required. That brings us to the end of this meeting. Rather a longer meeting than usual, but with the budget, it's always more difficult to wade through the proposals, assure ourselves that they are sound. We meet next on the 14th of February. Thank you for your attendance. Wish you a safe journey home. Thank you.